Phoenix, Arizona, in a middle-class neighborhood. It's 2 o'clock in the afternoon. Not exactly an hour of the day you'd expect there to be criminal activity.
911, what is your emergency?
I was just out in the alley, and I had an elderly neighbor who lives across from me. And he's laying in the backyard.
Is he there by himself?
No, he has a wife, and they're both elderly.
Do you know where she's at right
No,
now?
she might be in the house. I don't know.
Okay, let me get the officers going out there.
It was just a routine day on patrol. We got the call, subject moaning in the backyard. When I was a kid, I lived 3 blocks from where this occurred. It was a nice, quiet neighborhood. You have an idea of what's reported, but a lot of times you find out that it's totally different.
The Phoenix Police Department arrives in this backyard. An elderly man is bleeding profusely from his head, and his hands are tied with duct tape.
He wasn't asking for help, he was asking for his wife. Where's my wife?
They turn and look at the house,
Your wife's inside?
and the interior door to the home is standing open. Is the suspect still here?
Call him back.
Sir, stay still. Hold on.
Dispatch. Oh my God. There's a body in here.
This was a horrible crime that we'd stumbled upon.
Retired Sergeant Darren Birch. In 1998, I was a detective in the adult sex crimes detail with the Phoenix Police Department. When I was a young kid, I learned that my grandmother had been brutally raped when she was a child. And I realized very quickly, I hate criminals. It was a Monday, I remember it vividly. I get a call from my boss, which was unusual. I can still hear him saying the words. We have a home invasion of an elderly couple, and the woman was brutally raped. Every detective has that one case for whatever reason. This particular case is that one case for me.
What do we got?
We have 2 elderly victims in their 80s.
Birch is briefed by the officers on the scene that John and Hazel Durnovich live in this house. They've lived there for many, many years.
They were childhood sweethearts who'd grown old together. John was a big, spry man, worked in the construction industry so he could fix anything. Hazel was a beautiful woman. She was still running the show at the house, even at 81, in great shape.
Birch learns they've both been removed by ambulance to a hospital, both in very critical condition. Birch looks at this crime scene and finds some things that are very disturbing to him. Birch is well experienced. He's seen about everything. This he'd never seen before.
Yeah, the scene was very violent. We had a lot of blood, a lot of weird items.
He sees an instrument laying on the floor that is covered in blood and has gray hair attached to the blood. This is a solid steel bar. This is the instrument used to bludgeon this victim. He sees a bloody flashlight. There is a can of Crisco vegetable paste open on the floor with a bloody imprint of the flashlight in the Crisco.
It was a horrible scene. This was about as grisly as it gets.
The rest of the house had that typical burglary ransacking look, where drawers were open, things were strewn about. It was hard to tell if anything was really missing.
Are they looking for money, weapons, jewelry, things that commonly can be turned into cash? Birch is still trying to determine what's happened here. Birch also wonders why one victim is inside this home But her husband, John Dernovich, is in the backyard. Why would he go outside?
Over here, we found him on the ground.
In the backyard, there was this drag mark where we found John. It looked like he was in the area of the circuit breaker and had been dragged from that location on the side of the house. We could see the power box door was open.
And he looks at that box and he notices that the master switch is off. So somebody turned off the power to this home. Why would that happen?
Looking at the yard, we found this beautiful, pristine shoe print. It was beautiful. It was the only thing we had, but it was beautiful.
That's as useful as a fingerprint. It can be extremely unique. And if we find our man wearing a pair of Reeboks, we can match the shoe on his foot to the impression in that mud, which puts him at this crime scene.
All right, Don, you got it from here?
Yep.
All right.
First thing I did when I arrived to the hospital was talk to the doctors.
The doctor explains that Mr. Dernovich has suffered a subdural hematoma as a result of blunt force trauma. A subdural hematoma is a bruising of the brain.
Basically, the brain is swelling. He was hit about 5 times with a metal bar. John, I'm Detective Birch with the Phoenix Police Department. How you doing, John?
All right.
Do you remember what happened today, John?
Dernovich explains that he and his wife had been watching television when the power went off in the house. He told his wife he would go outside and check the circuit box.
Oh, maybe it had to be there.
You walked out to the meter box?
Yeah.
He saw the box was open and the master switch was off.
And then the next thing he knows, he's on the ground.
And I know he had me hit me in the back of the head, and then started tying me up with tape.
And he then went unconscious and doesn't remember anything after that until he was awakened in a hospital by a doctor.
So I take it you want to prosecute?
Hell yeah.
Thank you, John.
Birch has learned something. The power box was the lure. You have a perpetrator who has a plan. He needs to draw somebody out of that house, and the way to do it is to turn off the power.
I kind of looked at this as a homicide in the sense that he intended to kill these people, especially the way he brutally attacked John and, in my estimation, left him for dead.
Whoever is responsible had conducted surveillance on this house. He knew a lot, and he took advantage of carrying out a plan that worked quite well.
Doc, what can you tell me about Hazel?
The doctor treating Hazel Dernovich says that she has a number of contusions and abrasions, in excess of 100, and she had been extensively tortured by assault much longer than her husband. And in the doctor's opinion, she was raped with an object. This draws Birch's memory back to that crime scene and explains why the bloody flashlight was bloody.
People look at a crime like this and they wonder, how could you attack an 81-year-old woman? It is the epitome of the coward. Guys like this always go for the most vulnerable targets.
This was a nice lady who had been brutalized beyond imagination. I was eager to talk to Hazel, see how she was doing, see if I could get some type of suspect information. Hazel, what I'd like to do is see if we can refresh your memory about what occurred, if you feel up to it.
I haven't felt very good all week.
It was difficult at first talking to her because it reminded me of my grandmother. This was a very petite, intelligent, feisty woman. I had to really work through that in terms of not crying or getting upset seeing this woman because she looked like she had been beaten half to death.
While Birch is speaking to her, he looks at her left hand.
And then I mentioned her wedding ring. I said, "Where's your wedding ring?"
Did this man take your wedding ring? And she said she doesn't remember, which is normal in a situation like that. It's a traumatic experience.
Then we talked about what she saw in terms of what this guy did. Hazel is wondering what's taken John so long.
He was outside and he had to come back in, and I wondered what happened to him. I went down there, and it looked like there was another man there.
And she said she looked at this man and said, "What are you doing?" And he dropped her husband to the ground and said, "I'll show you what I'm doing."
He put electrical tape over my mouth.
Okay.
So I wouldn't scream.
And then he goes and starts ransacking. And then she remembers him coming back. And then he sexually assaults her.
In my own career, I have had elderly victims, and your heart just bleeds for them. What animal did this? You feel a need to find this person right now.
It was very, very painful for her in so many ways. So I focused on the suspect.
Let's talk about what he looked like, if you can, just for a little bit. How old was he, do you think?
Well, I would say maybe late 20s or 30s, something like that.
Okay. And how tall was he?
He was quite tall, and he had a mustache.
What race was he, do you know?
Just a white man, I would think. Maybe it was suntan, I don't know.
Maybe suntan?
Yeah.
That's a start. It's pretty vague, but it's better than Mr. X.
So I very quickly realized what I need to do is see if there's anyone else that knows about that house. And thankfully, there was a housekeeper. Once a week, somebody would come in and just clean the main areas.
And she said her name was Katie Powell, and she had a key to the house, but she doesn't work for us anymore. That draws Birch's attention.
I'm going to let you rest, okay?
Right.
Thank you, Hazel.
Now we've developed a name of somebody who has the ability to come and go from this home, who was terminated of their employment by the Dernoviches. Maybe it means nothing, maybe it means everything. Detective Darren Birch at Phoenix PD is investigating the brutal attack of an elderly couple, John and Hazel Dernovich.
This was a violent attack in their home. You're not human if it doesn't affect you in some way.
Detective Birch has interviewed the victims in this case and has learned that they terminated a housekeeper in the recent past. Her name is Katie Powell.
I scheduled a sit-down videotape interview, knowing that if something goes south, she lawyers up, I'll never see her again. I had to eliminate her as a suspect.
How's he feeling?
Better.
I started off very casual, not knowing where it was going to go.
Do you remember what you're doing that Monday? Don't have any idea. No
I
recollection.
don't know.
Well, maybe that might be able to help you with it. Think back at, first of all, when you first realized something had occurred. Let's talk about that.
Oh my God.
What were you doing then?
I was sitting down watching TV. I could not believe what I was hearing. That's the only way I can describe it. I mean, it was just so devastating. It's like somebody hit me with a bat. It's the only way I can describe it. It hit me that hard.
She seemed very nice. She seemed genuinely concerned about John and Hazel. She didn't appear deceptive.
He said to her, "We understand you were fired by the Dernoviches. Can you tell us about that?"
I was OD'd on caretaking, and I don't think I had anything left. My cup was empty when it came to John and Hazel at that point. And I have a bad back, and I can only work. That's a big house for one person to clean. But I think Hazel was really getting attached to me. She loved me. I loved her. I always tell her, I love you guys. Be good to each other.
There wasn't really an issue with it in terms of bad blood. I didn't get that feeling at all.
Let's see here. Your work.
I was working at Jana King, a company my boyfriend runs.
And what's your boyfriend's name?
Terry. As a matter of fact, it was funny too because when all that happened, Terry had gone, "We were just over there."
When I learned that she had a boyfriend and he had been there, I had to really kind of look and decide whether or not there was a connection.
Birch is thinking like a cop. Everything about her says she's not a participant and has no knowledge of this offense. But her boyfriend, Terry Findley, is an X factor. What about him?
He knew about the house. He knew about the layout. All those things that the suspect might know, he would know. So I had to eliminate him.
Mr. Finley? Detective Birch, Phoenix PD. You mind if I ask you a couple questions?
Sure.
Birch then explains that he's in possession of information that Finley had recent contact with the Dernovich family, and they've been attacked in their home.
No.
Finley is shocked.
I was looking for a very angry criminal who had a criminal history of violence. He didn't fit that bill, he really didn't. I had a tight window. We knew when this crime occurred. He owned a business, and he also worked for someone at the same time. And so I was able to go and check on his work.
Mr. Finley was at work during the time frame of the crime, so he had no opportunity to be a participant in it.
All right, appreciate your time. Thank you.
No problem.
So what could be a lead is gone. Mr. Finley could not have done this. Birch is now in an unenviable position of having the best reliance on evidence found at this scene.
With such a violent scene, generally you get some type of evidence like sweat, DNA from the skin where someone's grabbing someone. Rape, you're gonna have some type of DNA generally. I was shocked when he told me, we have nothing.
Nothing but the shoe print.
We don't have any DNA, we have no fingerprints, we had nothing other than a shoe print in the back alley.
No DNA, no fingerprints.
I may have had doubts with any other crime scene detective if they had told me they had nothing. But from Don, I knew for him to come up with nothing, there was nothing.
The indications are he wore gloves. Once again, a planned attack. This is not this guy's first rodeo. He knows not to leave touch DNA and other physical evidence behind.
This was a very difficult case from the get-go. They had experienced crime scene folks go in there with a fine-tooth comb, and they couldn't get anything that could lead them in the direction of this suspect, because the suspect was really careful. I mean, these crimes are really just mind-boggling.
Police have determined that the perpetrator selects his weapons from what he discovers in the premises.
In this particular MO, the suspect came with nothing other than gloves. He literally got the duct tape, the metal bar used to attack both John and Hazel, the flashlight. All these items were already at the scene, and that actually shows a sign of a organized ability to adapt to what's there. So he will have a criminal history, and sadly, he's gonna have a future until we catch him. The crime scene didn't give us any leads, so we have to recanvass the area. We talk with neighbors.
You never know what people see.
I'm with the police department. Sorry to wake you up.
But the only thing that Birch learns is that everyone thinks that Hazel and John Dernovich are wonderful. Why would anyone want to hurt them? They're the nicest people in this neighborhood.
I got to almost know the couple through the friends and neighbors. It was a love story. John and Hazel were grade school sweethearts, and they complemented each other, and they grew together.
They'd been together for 60-plus years. You know, they had a life together and were enjoying perhaps the last act when this terrible turn of events took place.
So more positive news about the family, but no news about who Mr. X might be.
Hazel called me every day, and I knew something was up because I got a voice message from her.
First message.
This is Hazel, and I just wanted to tell you that John had a heart attack Wednesday, and he's in the Baptist hospital, and I am too, so if you'd like to reach us, you can call us. Thank you.
I was so focused on the investigation, I didn't realize he was in harm's way and he was going to die. For them to, in the golden years, be brutalized like this and have that beautiful marriage end with such horrible tragedy. Not that I needed something to keep my focus on this case, but I just could not erase it. I could not erase that message.
Birch was overcome by anger, by rage, by guilt that he hadn't found who did this yet. I've had cases like that. I know what it feels like, and it is awful. It is beyond awful.
Failure wasn't an option, and that really sounds like cliche, I know it, but it really is so true. We could not fail Hazel and John with this case. We had to solve it. We had to give them justice.
Darren Birch is a very good man, and I'm not at all surprised that he was the one that took it upon himself to see what I think would initially appear to be an almost impossible case. It would be him that took it on and said, hell with that. I'm gonna solve this, and I'm gonna find that guy. Am I surprised that Darren did that? Yeah, I'm impressed, not a bit surprised. They label him just by his profession that he was a police officer, and he was that and a great one. But it sort of limited him because he's just a great man and a good guy.
After John died, everything seemed to kind of wash away. I had nothing left. So now it's time to look at crime analysis again in a different way. And that's when I really looked at the crime scene photos, and I noticed her hand, and there was no wedding ring. And it reminded me about something that I couldn't deal with at the time because I didn't know what it meant. I looked at that photo and thought, I wonder if he removed it from her. She just didn't remember that.
This gives him something else to use in searching for similar cases. So he begins by looking at cases where wedding rings or jewelry has been taken from the victim during a violent sexual assault.
And that's when I found 3 robberies and a rape where the suspect physically pulled the ring off. That was huge. That was my guide. Because now I had not just the Dernovich crime scene, I had 4 other crime scenes I could look at to try to find this monster.
This is the same guy doing precisely the same crime because he is a serial rapist. Detective Darren Birch is investigating the attack on John and Hazel Dernovich. It's already cost John Dernovich his life. He has discovered other cases involving precisely the same MO.
This is a serial rapist by their very nature, is what they do, what they want, what they live for.
He'd sneak up behind people in the dark of night or attack them while they're laying in their beds. He was brutalizing, tormenting these people who really are the most vulnerable victims.
When Birch is reviewing these 4 cases he finds in Phoenix, he notices that one particular victim seems to have more details than any of the others.
The one victim that really was wonderful in terms of helping police was Sophia Rosenthal.
Thanks for coming down. We appreciate it.
Whatever it takes to find him.
She is one of the best witnesses Birch has ever encountered.
That's the only way I can describe it.
She says this man recently broke into her home, attacked her, stole her wedding ring off her finger with such force that he broke her finger.
During my interview with her, I kept referring to the suspect as a white male, and all the other reports said white male.
Or Mediterranean look.
She distinctly remembers his appearance.
She literally said he was Mediterranean. And that was huge because that gave me another direction to take this.
Birch decides to put her with a police artist so they can draw this individual. But she's also an artist and asks if she can draw the picture. Now, that's extremely unusual, but Rosenthal has the skills necessary. and she draws a very good drawing of an individual. Birch is elated that he has this drawing of this guy to show to Hazel Dernovich.
Unfortunately, the next time I interviewed her, she had a hard time talking about the rape. She could not identify him. From the composite that Sophia gave me, she couldn't give me any kind of description of the face itself, as if what she saw was a blank face. I think her memory of that event was so skewed by the horrific nature of that crime. It's just so brutally sad. I want to give her justice. And at least now we had a description. We had a composite. We had enough where we could find him. We could then build a case around it.
Birch has no idea where this guy is. He could be anywhere and could have been other places doing precisely the same thing. This is what motivates him to make a national broadcast. He puts together a bulletin which he sends all over the country through a system called the Violent Criminal Apprehension Program, asking for detectives who can respond with a similar case.
I had to catch him. We had to. He's gonna kill someone if he hasn't already killed someone.
When you put out these bulletins, you wait for it to simmer on the stove to see if it makes soup. You're hopeful you're going to get replies, but you have no way of knowing if you will.
And at this point, oh my gosh, 9 months has gone by. The frustrations were horrible, heart-wrenching. Every week, I put that bulletin out, week after week, after month.
In 1998, I was a detective with the Oakland Park Police Department in South Florida. Teletypes would come through 24 hours a day from all agencies. Each day when I came to work, I would kind of skim through them to see if anything pertained to what I was doing. And there was a teletype from Detective Birch from Phoenix. And I'm reading the teletype, and this could have been reading my own police report. It was the same exact story.
I still got chills thinking about that phone call. Karen told me I have a case just like yours and happened on October 20th. October 20th is literally the next day after the Dernovich crime. That shocked me. To be that brazen, such a sexual predator, that 24 hours later, he does a crime other side of the country.
I was assigned a home invasion case that resulted in a sexual battery. It was an elderly couple. The husband was disabled. The suspect had forced his way into the home when she answered the door. He came with no supplies. He used her plastic gloves. He immediately took her wedding ring. After he finished ransacking the house, the sexual battery took place.
She then tells Birch the critical piece of information he was so hopeful to receive.
We did lift one fingerprint off the dresser that he had left there prior to putting the gloves on. And we had a hit on the print. It matched to Mike Metlow, who also went by the name of Mike Urick.
I literally did a happy dance and yelled to my boss, "We got him, we got a name." And that's everything, because now you can compare prints and DNA, you can do all those things, you just have to have a name. We didn't have that before, it was so exciting.
Immediately, I tried to do a criminal history on him. And I came up with numerous names, numerous dates of birth, driver's licenses.
She realizes that he is a member or a former member of a Romani clan.
Romani immigrants from Eastern Europe celebrating the birthday of a Chicago Roma king with music, dancing, and a traditional feast. But law enforcement officials say there are other families who have no connection to this one that are involved in organized crime rings. For decades, they roamed America in caravans of travel trailers and pickup trucks. But police say these criminals have changed with the times.
Become so bold now that they fly to various parts of the country and rent vehicles out there.
Most of the cases I dealt with were over monetary contractual deals. It was always roof repairs, driveway repairs, things that weren't done or accomplished. Somebody comes out and says they can do it for $800 cash today, and you don't see them the next day, and your roof's still in disrepair. That's called a learning lesson.
It was an incredible education, learning about the crime syndicates, these organized families. I knew nothing other than what I saw in movies.
Mr. Urich is a member of one of these groups, which very conveniently explains his touring around the country. They move to avoid arrest.
Mike Urich is with the family doing these cons and doing these scams, but there's a certain part of him, that sexual predator, that violent nature that needs to attack women is there. And I think at some point he goes rogue, he goes off the rails, and he starts doing these side crimes.
She tells Birch that, in her opinion, it's likely Urich has fled the state of Florida. Now the question becomes, where is he?
There was no leads. We canvassed the neighborhood. I found one neighbor that had found a yellow station wagon during the time of the crime parked 2 houses away. He thought it was odd because it had Arizona tags on it, and that was a rental house that was vacant. So I got a search warrant for the townhome. It was a jackpot. It was filled with large green garbage bags, packed floor to ceiling, every room. I found a huge duffel bag in one of the closets filled with jewelry. Later we figured out it was over $250,000 in jewelry in it.
So there in this crime scene, rings, lots and lots of rings. My victims' rings were there, and I couldn't believe it.
I found about 20 boxes of brand new sneakers, Reebok sneakers. When I had talked to Detective Birch, he said he had a footprint left at his scene from a Reebok sneaker. So at that point, I took scans of them and sent him the scans I had to see if they matched any of his footprints that were left at the scene.
I was so excited with that because now I can bring in the only evidence I have with the Dernovich case. It was that shoe print.
Birch is now armed with more than a drawing and a description. He's armed with a photograph and a name. It's Mike Urich, and this is his picture. He adds that to his bulletin and sends that across the country, and what returns is a flood of information.
Police departments from across the country are reporting activity of Mike Urich. So I'm getting calls from Nevada, Utah, Texas, New Mexico, Indiana. I'm just getting flooded calls.
One of the replies to Birch's bulletin comes from the Chicago Police Department. They informed Birch that patrol officers responded to a crime in progress where Michael Urich was attacking an elderly woman without realizing that her daughter was hiding upstairs and was on the phone to 911. Chicago PD arrives and arrests Mr. Urich in the act of committing the crime. When they take him before a judge and a court, Urich's attorney argues that he suffers from mental incompetence.
He was convicted and sentenced to a mental health ward, and I was able to explain to him who this monster was that they had in custody. They had no idea any of this was happening. They just had their one crime. And because of that, he was going to be getting out real soon. So we all suddenly went from we had plenty of time in the world to we have to go now.
Detective Birch has been working the Dernovich case and has obtained information that his suspect is Mike Urich, who is currently in a psychiatric ward in Illinois. Birch's plan is to go there, interrogate Urich, and get information from him that allows him to be charged in the Dernovich case. There are probably a dozen other states that want a piece of Mike Urich, and Birch is determined to get the first slice of Urich's pie. Birch is aware he needs to move quickly.
Darren realized that there are other cops in other cities that are going to grab this guy. And he said, you know what, for John and Hazel, I'm going to make sure they come back to Arizona.
He takes his sergeant and they fly to Illinois to interrogate Mike Urich before he's released and in the wind again.
What was nice about having a supervisor like Jim Markey is that he was like a detective. He truly cared about these cases and excited like a detective when they're starting to piece it together, when the trail starts to make sense and everything goes to a suspect and you get him in custody, that excitement of getting your man. On top of that, the brutal nature of this criminal and these poor victims that lay in the wake. He was as galvanized to make sure this guy paid for these crimes, so it was great. And it was kind of nice having him there because I had this supervisor. There was a lot of pressure, and so I was nervous. I've done so many interviews in my 30 years. It was different in the sense that I had so much at stake. I kept hearing the recording of Hazel talking about when John died. I wanted to get him to make some admission.
He has a cassette tape with a 30-minute span. He's got 30 minutes to have Urich say something incriminating.
And when he started walking up, he's a big guy.
He could have squished me with one thigh. I mean, that's how big this guy was.
And he has that look, like, the only way I can describe it is arrogance. And he comes in, and there's a calm that came over me. Because now, yeah, I got you. And now you gotta play by my rules.
This is Detective Birch with the City of Phoenix Police Department, and I'm with Sergeant James Markey to interview one Michael Urich or Michael Metlow, who is an inmate at the Dixon Correctional Facility. And you are Mike Metlow?
Yes.
Okay, Mike, I'm Detective Birch, and I'm from a long way to talk to you.
As the conversation begins, he waives his rights and says he has nothing to hide. Perfect, Mr. Urich. Let's have a conversation. Birch begins asking innocuous questions. Could we have an address for you?
I can't tell you exactly the address, but it was in Phoenix. You remember the freeways? Because that kind of helped me get an idea of what part of Phoenix. 27th Street, Camelback. 27th Street, Camelback? Yeah, 27th Street.
I had so much adrenaline and excitement by this time that I was containing it because I knew he had just given up himself at the location where the Dernovich lived at the time of the crime.
He doesn't react to that, but in his mind, strike one for Mr. Urich.
I'll be honest, it's a guilty pleasure. It's a guilty pleasure to be able to look at that monster in the face and use a ruse against him. So I talked about the property aspect of his crimes. He was doing rings.
Now, I don't even understand why you even coming with it. Well, you guys came along this way to this? Why do you think we're here? Yeah, think about it. I don't even know what you're talking about.
There's a way of talking to the con men. You have to confront them every time they tell you a lie or every time they change their story, and you can't let it wait.
Hey, Mike, I'll be honest with you. We're going to go for the kill zone. We're going to go through the whole enchilada, Mike. We're not here.
They think they're conning you. You got to confront them immediately because it throws them off.
Jim Markey showed the shoe print and said, well, these are your shoes, as if that's a given.
Let me see those pictures. What you got there? You'll notice the Reebok for shoe print. I got lucky on this one. I really did. These were very unusual shoes. They did a warrant in Florida and came up with the same shoe box, which is of this special type of shoe.
and then he bit on it.
That's it, my super.
I was shocked. My jaw may have dropped because I did not expect that.
That's strike 2 and 3. He's an instinctual animal when it comes to physical attack, but he's a moron when it comes to anything else.
We had very little time left in the recording, so I felt this was the perfect time to bring the hammer down. We have nothing to lose, and we have everything to gain.
Okay, let me really straight up with you. We have 2 victims that positively identified you. One of them did a composite, which was a beautiful composite, actually. But now we have these 2 other rings, and we know it's you because it's the print, and it matched it with this, and with prints that we got at the scene, and with this photo, we had the case. It was a done deal. And then the cherry on top is what we would call is physical evidence. Physical evidence doesn't lie. People can make mistakes, people can lie, but physical evidence, prints don't lie. And is it not Phoenix right now? It is.
When you get a statement like that, then you just hit the ball out of Yankee Stadium. You did this in a few minutes, and Urich is beyond cooperative in terms of providing you with the rope you need to hang him with.
And the look on his face, that's when it exploded. It was like popping a balloon.
There's more than sufficient evidence to cause the extradition of Mr. Urich back to Phoenix, Arizona to face charges in the Dernovich case. And since they have him first, everyone else is going to have to wait.
Afterwards, we were giddy with excitement. We got him. It just felt really good. So good that before we hit the plane back to Phoenix, we saw the Chicago Cubs game at Wrigley Field. It was really cool. It was just one of those moments that I'll never forget.
So if you consider what Urich did in the Dernovich case, he's thinking about this. He's surveilling them. He identifies them as weak and elderly, easily overcome. When he climbed over that fence, Urich opened the shed and he finds the bar from a weight set. He picks it up and walks to the power box to kill the main power supply to the house.
John was the handyman. So when the power went out, there wasn't even a second thought what John was going to do. He was going to check the breakers. The idea of a home invasion, both husband and wife brutally beaten, gagged, bound, and then for her to be raped was beyond the pale.
After he assaults Hazel, he takes her wedding ring. He commits this violent, horrible crime, goes right back out over the same fence, leaves his shoe print in the mud, and goes on his merry way. He's off to find another victim.
As soon as we take the flight back to Phoenix, we have the photographic lineup that I've done with these other victims, these robbery victims.
That's him.
And every one of them was able to positively identify Mike Urich as the person who attacked them. I have all this great stuff, this literally, truly a mountain of evidence. He pled out to a lot of crimes. He pled out to the sexual assault of Sophia. He did plead out to attacking John and Hazel. It was just a matter of sentencing him.
He knows that he's going to be locked up in a box for the rest of his days and decides the coward's way out is to end his life. He makes a noose out of a bedsheet and hangs himself in the cell.
I was glad. He saved the victims from having to go to court. I was very happy to hear that he killed himself. It really was. It was this beautiful love story. And for it to end.
For nearly 3 decades, the answer sat hidden in plain sight. Not buried in some remote forest. Not locked inside a criminal mastermind's secret diary. Not erased by time. It was there from the beginning. A witness had seen the little boy walking with an older child. Investigators had heard the name. Reports had been written. Statements had been filed away. Yet somehow, while years turned into decades and decades turned into an entire generation, the truth remained untouched, gathering dust inside cardboard boxes stacked in police archives. Meanwhile, a 6-year-old boy waited for justice. His name was Ricky Neve. On a cold November morning in 1994, Ricky left his home on a housing estate in Peterborough, England. Like countless children across the country, he was supposed to be walking to school. The journey was short, familiar, ordinary. He never arrived. By the following day, his small body would be discovered in a wooded area only minutes from his home. He had been strangled. His clothes had been removed. His body had been positioned in a way that horrified experienced investigators. The crime shocked Britain. A child had vanished in broad daylight from a residential neighborhood. A 6-year-old boy had been murdered almost within sight of the place where he lived. Parents looked at their own children differently that week. School routes suddenly felt longer. Empty footpaths seemed darker. Every stranger became a possible threat. But what followed would become almost as disturbing as the murder itself. Because the investigation quickly narrowed its focus onto one person. Ricky's mother. The public watched as suspicion grew. Newspapers dissected her life. Detectives examined her past. Rumors spread through neighborhoods, pubs, and television screens across the country. People wanted answers. People wanted someone to blame. And slowly, almost imperceptibly at first, the case began drifting away from the truth. Years passed. The murder remained unsolved. The little boy whose death had once dominated headlines became another face in a collection of cold case files. Children who had attended school with Ricky grew into adults. Investigators retired. Witness memories faded. Entire technologies were invented. Governments changed. The world moved forward. Yet somewhere among those aging records was a name that should have changed everything. A 13-year-old boy. A teenager who had crossed paths with Ricky on the morning he disappeared. A teenager whose presence would later become impossible to ignore. But in 1994, nobody understood how significant that detail would become. Or perhaps they simply failed to look closely enough. This is not just the story of a murder. It is the story of assumptions. The story of tunnel vision. The story of how an investigation can become trapped inside its own theory. And it is the story of a predator who managed to avoid justice for nearly 28 years because attention was focused elsewhere. To understand why this case still fascinates criminologists, detectives, journalists, and true crime researchers, we need to start with a simple question. How does a child disappear on a Monday morning while walking to school? The answer seems obvious at first. Someone takes him. Someone harms him. Someone hides what happened. But the deeper investigators eventually dug into the case, the more unsettling the reality became. The person responsible was not a mysterious drifter passing through town. Not an adult serial killer lurking in the shadows. Not some unknown monster arriving from outside the community. The truth, when it finally emerged, was stranger and far more disturbing. The killer was a child. Just 13 years old. An age when most children worry about homework, football matches, television shows, and friendships. An age when society assumes innocence. An age when murder feels almost unimaginable. Yet the evidence would eventually reveal a darkness that few could comprehend. When the truth finally surfaced decades later, many people found themselves asking the same haunting question. What kind of thoughts exist inside the mind of a 13-year-old capable of killing a 6-year-old child? And perhaps an even more troubling question followed. Could this tragedy have been prevented? The morning Ricky disappeared was cold, grey, and unremarkable. The kind of late autumn morning that arrives quietly across eastern England. The sky hung low over Peterborough. Bare branches stretched above damp pathways. The air carried the smell of wet earth and approaching winter. Nothing about the day announced that it would become one of the most infamous child murder cases in modern British criminal history. No warning. No sign. No indication that within hours an entire community would be consumed by fear. Families would later replay that day endlessly in their minds. Neighbors would remember where they were. Teachers would remember taking attendance. Police officers would remember the first reports. Journalists would remember the breaking headlines. Everyone searched for the moment when normal life ended and tragedy began. But tragedies rarely announce themselves. They arrive disguised as ordinary days. Somewhere that morning, Ricky was walking. Somewhere that morning, another boy was watching. Somewhere that morning, paths crossed. The exact conversations may never be fully known. The precise words spoken between victim and killer may have disappeared forever. Yet the consequences of that encounter would echo across nearly 3 decades. As investigators would later discover, some of the most important clues appeared almost immediately after the murder. Witnesses came forward. Observations were recorded. Information existed. And yet information alone does not solve crimes. It must be recognized. It must be understood. It must be followed wherever it leads. In the Ricky Neve case, that process broke down. The result was one of the longest and most controversial murder investigations in modern Britain. For years, the case became a symbol of unanswered questions. Television documentaries revisited it. Newspaper articles re-examined it. Former detectives debated it. Members of the public speculated endlessly. Every anniversary brought renewed attention. Every development sparked fresh theories. Some believed the wrong person had been accused. Others believed the truth would never emerge. Many feared the killer had escaped forever. And perhaps the most heartbreaking reality of all was that Ricky himself gradually became overshadowed by the controversy surrounding the investigation. The headlines focused on suspects. The debates focused on police decisions. The arguments focused on courtroom battles. But at the center of everything was still a 6-year-old boy who never came home from school. A child whose future disappeared before it had truly begun. A child whose story deserved to be remembered. Because beyond the legal complexities, beyond the investigative failures, beyond the sensational media coverage, there existed a human tragedy. A little boy lost his life. His sisters lost a brother. A community lost its sense of safety. And Britain lost another piece of its innocence. The murder of children occupies a unique place in public consciousness. It triggers something primal. Perhaps it is because childhood represents vulnerability. Perhaps it is because children trust the world in ways adults no longer can. Or perhaps it is because crimes against children force us to confront the darkest possibilities of human behavior. Whatever the reason, the death of Ricky Neve lingered in the national memory long after other cases faded. Not simply because it remained unsolved, but because nothing about it seemed to make sense. The victim was 6. The crime scene suggested disturbing motivations. The investigation produced confusion rather than clarity. And the eventual truth would prove more shocking than many of the theories that circulated for years. This is a story filled with contradictions. A killer who was barely a teenager. An investigation that overlooked critical evidence. A suspect who became the center of attention while the real offender remained free. A case that appeared cold but was never truly dead. And a breakthrough that arrived nearly 3 decades later through advances in forensic science unimaginable to detectives working in 1994. When justice finally came, it did not arrive dramatically. There was no sudden confession. No cinematic revelation. No detective bursting into a room with a final piece of evidence. Instead, justice emerged slowly. Patiently. One document. One witness statement. One forensic result. One forgotten detail at a time. The truth had survived all those years. Waiting. And as we begin this journey into one of Britain's most troubling child murder cases, remember this. Everything you are about to hear happened within a relatively small community. The people involved lived near one another. Walked the same streets. Passed each other in everyday life. The answers were never hidden on the other side of the world. They were always close. Uncomfortably close. Close enough that the truth brushed against investigators from the very beginning. Yet somehow it slipped through their fingers. For 28 years. This is the story of Ricky Neve. The story of a child who vanished on his way to school. The story of a murder that shocked a nation. And the story of how justice, delayed for nearly 3 decades, finally caught up with a killer who had once been just 13 years old. 28 years. That is how long the truth remained buried. 28 years of unanswered questions. 28 years of newspaper headlines fading into archives. 28 years of detectives retiring, witnesses aging, and memories slowly dissolving into uncertainty. And through all those years, one image refused to disappear. A 6-year-old boy with bright eyes and untidy blonde hair. A child who should have grown up. A child who should have celebrated birthdays, finished school, fallen in love, built a career, perhaps started a family of his own. Instead, his life ended in a patch of woodland less than a mile from home. And for nearly 3 decades, nobody was held responsible. To understand why this case continues to haunt Britain, we need to begin not with the murder itself, but with a discovery. A discovery so disturbing that even experienced investigators struggled to process what they were seeing. It was the afternoon of November 29, 1994. The search for 6-year-old Ricky Neve had already entered its 2nd day. Police officers, volunteers, local residents, and worried family members had spent hours combing through Peterborough's housing estates, pathways, open fields, and wooded areas. Every passing hour increased the fear. Children sometimes wandered away. Children sometimes hid. Children sometimes got lost. But as daylight faded and then returned the following morning, hope began to shrink. The questions grew heavier. Where was Ricky? Why had nobody seen him? And why had he never reached school? The answers waited in a small wooded area near Welland Estate. The location was not remote. Not hidden deep within a forest. Not miles away from civilization. It was frighteningly close to everyday life. The kind of place people walked past without thinking. The kind of place children played near. The kind of place that blended into the landscape so completely that nobody imagined it could conceal something horrifying. Then a police officer noticed something. A shape. A patch of color that seemed out of place among the brown leaves and winter vegetation. As he moved closer, the reality emerged piece by piece. A small body. Motionless. Silent. Abandoned. In that instant, the search became a murder investigation. The boy lying there was Ricky Neve. 6 years old. Gone. The woodland stood eerily still. No dramatic signs of struggle stretched across the landscape. No obvious trail pointed toward the killer. The scene appeared almost calm. And that calmness made everything more disturbing. Because what had happened there was anything but peaceful. Investigators quickly secured the area. Forensic teams arrived. Photographers documented every detail. Detectives began examining the position of the body. And almost immediately they understood that this was not a random accident. This was homicide. Someone had intentionally killed a child. But there was something else. Something that elevated the horror beyond even the act of murder itself. Ricky had been found without his clothing. His body had been deliberately arranged. Positioned. Displayed. His arms and legs extended outward in a star-like formation. The posture appeared intentional. Calculated. As though someone had taken time after death to manipulate the scene. Veteran investigators later described the discovery as deeply unsettling. Because staging a body often reveals something important about an offender. It suggests thought. It suggests purpose. It suggests that the crime was not simply about causing death. Something else had happened inside the killer's mind. Something darker. Something more complex. As forensic experts began their work, one conclusion became clear. Ricky had not died by accident. He had been strangled. The attack appeared sudden, unexpected. The evidence suggested he had likely been seized from behind. A method requiring physical proximity. A method involving direct contact. A method that forced victim and killer into the same terrible moment. For a 6-year-old child, there was little chance of escape. Little chance of resistance. Little chance of survival. The realization spread rapidly through the investigation team. This was not merely a missing child case ending in tragedy. This was one of the most disturbing child murders Cambridgeshire had ever encountered. News traveled quickly. Within hours, fear moved through Peterborough like an approaching storm. Parents called schools. Schools contacted families. Children were warned not to walk alone. Doors that normally remained unlocked were suddenly secured. Curtains shifted as neighbors watched unfamiliar faces passing through the estate. Everyone wanted to know the same thing. Who could do something like this? The assumption came naturally. Most people imagined an adult. A dangerous stranger. A predator hiding in the shadows. Someone passing through the area unnoticed. Someone older. Someone experienced. Because imagining the alternative was almost impossible. Few people considered that the truth might be sitting much closer to home. As investigators reconstructed Ricky's final known movements, witnesses began coming forward. Small details emerged. Fragments of memory. Moments that had seemed insignificant at the time. A sighting here. A conversation there. A child seen walking through the estate. Another child seen nearby. The puzzle pieces existed. But at that stage, nobody knew which pieces mattered most. And that uncertainty would shape the next 28 years. Meanwhile, public attention turned toward Ricky's family. The scrutiny was immediate. Intense. Unrelenting. The media wanted answers. The police wanted answers. The community wanted answers. And as investigators dug into the circumstances surrounding Ricky's home life, troubling information began to emerge. His mother, Ruth Neve, was already known to social services. Reports existed. Concerns had been raised. Questions about the welfare of the children had circulated before the murder ever occurred. To detectives under immense pressure, these details seemed significant. Potentially crucial. Perhaps even explanatory. The focus of the investigation began shifting. Slowly at first. Then dramatically. The woodland. The witnesses. The sightings. The unexplained movements on the morning of November 28th. These elements remained important. But increasingly, attention centered elsewhere. Inside the family. Inside the home. Inside the life of Ruth Neve. The theory gained momentum. Could the killer be someone the child already knew? Could the answer lie within the family itself? The possibility seemed plausible. Many child homicide investigations involve relatives or caregivers. Statistics supported that reality. Experience reinforced it. Investigators followed the path that appeared most likely. Unfortunately, probability is not proof. And assumptions are not evidence. Yet once a theory takes hold, it can become surprisingly difficult to challenge. Especially when that theory appears to explain the available facts. This phenomenon has a name among criminologists and investigators. Tunnel vision. The tendency to focus on one explanation while overlooking alternatives. The tendency to interpret new information through an existing belief. The tendency to see confirmation rather than contradiction. Years later, critics would argue that the Ricky Neve investigation became one of the most striking examples of tunnel vision in modern British policing. Because while detectives concentrated on one suspect, another possibility remained quietly waiting in the background. A name. A witness account. A teenager seen with Ricky on the morning he vanished. At the time, the significance of that sighting seemed uncertain. It was recorded. Not ignored completely. But neither was it pursued with the urgency it would later deserve. And so the investigation continued down a different road. A road that would consume years. Then decades. The public followed every development. Newspapers published details of the family's troubled history. Television programs debated possible motives. Commentators speculated endlessly. The case became larger than the crime itself. It became a national story. A mystery. A controversy. A tragedy wrapped inside another tragedy. Because at the center of all the discussion stood a little boy who could no longer speak for himself. Ricky became a symbol. A face appearing on posters, news reports, and documentary programs. But symbols can sometimes obscure the human being behind them. The real child. The child who laughed. Who played. Who dreamed. Who woke up on a Monday morning expecting an ordinary day. Somewhere beneath the headlines and speculation, that reality remained. A 6-year-old had lost his life. And his killer remained unidentified. As months turned into years, the murder investigation entered dangerous territory. The further time moved from the crime itself, the harder the truth became to reach. Witnesses forgot details. Memories blurred. Potential evidence deteriorated. Opportunities disappeared. Every unsolved case faces this enemy. Time. Time erodes certainty. Time weakens recollection. Time allows mistakes to solidify into accepted narratives. Yet sometimes time also preserves secrets. Because while memories fade, evidence occasionally survives. Waiting for technology to catch up. Waiting for investigators willing to look again. Waiting for someone to ask a different question. That future was still decades away. In 1994, nobody could see it coming. Nobody knew that the case would stretch across nearly 30 years. Nobody knew that scientific advances not yet available would one day reshape the entire investigation. Nobody knew that a 13-year-old boy connected to the case would eventually stand trial as a grown man. All of that remained hidden beyond the horizon. For now, there was only grief, fear, confusion, and a community desperate for answers. The murder of Ricky Neve had become one of Britain's most disturbing mysteries. The victim was known. The crime scene was known. The horror was undeniable. Yet the truth remained frustratingly out of reach. Or perhaps not out of reach at all. Perhaps it had been visible from the beginning. Waiting patiently among witness statements, overlooked clues, and forgotten names. Waiting for someone to finally notice what had been there all along. Because in this story, the most chilling twist is not that the killer escaped justice for 28 years. The most chilling twist is that the path toward the truth may have existed from the very first days of the investigation. And nobody followed it far enough. Imagine opening a file cabinet and finding the answer to a murder that happened almost 30 years ago. Not a confession. Not a hidden photograph. Not some dramatic piece of evidence overlooked in a dusty attic. Just a name. A name written down by investigators in the earliest days of the case. A name connected to witness statements. A name linked to the victim's final known movements. A name that sat quietly inside the investigation while an entire nation searched elsewhere. That is one of the reasons the murder of Ricky Neve continues to fascinate criminal investigators today. Because this is not merely the story of a killer. It is the story of a truth that was visible, yet somehow remained unseen. When people hear about unsolved murders, they often imagine missing evidence. Lost opportunities. Perfect crimes. But sometimes the evidence exists from the beginning. The real challenge is recognizing what it means. In November 1994, Britain was entering winter. Christmas decorations were beginning to appear in shop windows. Families were preparing for the holidays. Children were counting down the weeks until school break. Life moved forward in its ordinary rhythm. Then a 6-year-old boy vanished. Within days, newspapers carried his photograph. Within weeks, his murder dominated headlines. Within months, The case became one of the country's most emotionally charged investigations. The details were impossible to forget. A young child. A quiet housing estate. A body discovered in woodland. An offender who appeared capable of extraordinary cruelty. People wanted a monster. A stranger. An obvious villain. Someone who fit the image society had created for child killers. The truth would prove far more unsettling. Because evil does not always arrive in the form we expect. Sometimes it wears a school uniform. Sometimes it has not yet reached adulthood. Sometimes it looks so ordinary that people fail to recognize it standing directly in front of them. Long before a courtroom finally revealed what happened, fragments of the future were already scattered across Peterborough. A witness seeing two boys together. A fleeting encounter. A seemingly insignificant observation. One child older. One child younger. Nothing about the sight would have appeared remarkable in the moment. Children walked together all the time. Children talked. Children wandered through the estate. Life was full of ordinary interactions. Yet history often hides inside ordinary moments. A passing glance. A brief conversation. A decision lasting only seconds. And sometimes the difference between an ordinary day and a tragedy is measured by a single choice made by a single person. Somewhere on the morning of November 28, 1994, that choice was made. The exact sequence of events remains partially obscured by time. No camera recorded the encounter. No witness observed every moment. The woodland kept its secrets. The victim could never tell his story. Only fragments survived. Fragments that investigators would spend years trying to assemble. Yet one fact eventually became undeniable. Ricky Neve did not disappear into thin air. He crossed paths with someone. Someone who understood enough to isolate him. Someone who brought him to a place where help could not reach him. Someone who left behind a crime scene so disturbing that investigators would continue discussing it decades later. What makes this case uniquely chilling is the age of the offender. Society has developed a framework for understanding adult killers. We discuss motives, psychology, patterns of behavior, criminal histories. But when the offender is a child, those familiar explanations begin to break down. People instinctively ask different questions. How early can violent fantasies begin? What warning signs exist? Can childhood itself conceal dangerous impulses? Can someone barely entering adolescence commit an act so brutal that it shocks an entire country? These questions would eventually dominate discussions surrounding the Ricky Neve case. Not immediately. Not in 1994. Back then, the focus remained elsewhere. The investigation moved in a direction that seemed logical, reasonable, even inevitable. Yet each step taken along that path pulled attention further from the truth. The consequence was devastating. Years passed without resolution. A generation grew up knowing Ricky's face but not knowing who killed him. Cold case investigators inherited mountains of paperwork. Journalists revisited old theories. Documentaries re-examined forgotten evidence. Families waited. And somewhere in Britain, the person responsible continued living a normal life. That reality is difficult to comprehend. While anniversaries came and went, while memorials were held, while detectives revisited the file again and again, the killer remained free. Not because he was a criminal mastermind. Not because he had constructed an elaborate deception. But because the investigation had become trapped. Locked inside assumptions. Locked inside a narrative that seemed convincing. Locked inside a version of events that felt correct. The danger of assumptions is that they become invisible. Once people accept a theory, contradictory evidence often appears less important. Alternative possibilities receive less attention. Questions stop being asked. And gradually, certainty replaces curiosity. In the Ricky Neve investigation, that process would have enormous consequences. Because the case contained a paradox. The more certain investigators became about one explanation, the further they drifted from another. Years later, when modern forensic science reopened old wounds and old files, detectives would discover something remarkable. The passage of time had not destroyed every clue. Some evidence had survived. Waiting. Silent. Patient. Almost as if the case itself refused to be forgotten. The advances that transformed the investigation were technologies detectives in 1994 could scarcely have imagined. Methods capable of extracting answers from traces once considered useless. Methods capable of revisiting evidence long after witnesses had forgotten details and suspects had altered their stories. Science became a bridge across nearly 3 decades. A bridge connecting a frightened little boy in 1994 to a courtroom in 2022. But before that bridge could be crossed, investigators first needed to understand the world in which the crime occurred. Because murders do not happen in isolation. They happen in neighborhoods, communities, families, schools, social environments. Every case grows from a specific place and a specific time. To understand Ricky's final day, we must understand the streets he walked, the estate where he lived, the people who knew him, the complicated family circumstances surrounding his childhood, the atmosphere of Peterborough in the early 1990s. Only then does the tragedy reveal its full shape. Only then can we see how a vulnerable 6-year-old boy moved through a world that was far more complicated than it appeared from the outside. And only then can we begin to understand how a crime that seemed impossible became reality. Because before there was a murder investigation, there was a child. Before there were suspects, there was a family. Before there were headlines, there was a neighborhood waking up to another cold November morning. A place where children played between rows of houses. A place where neighbors recognized familiar faces. A place where danger seemed distant. A place where nobody imagined they were about to become part of one of Britain's most infamous true crime stories. The answers lie there. At the beginning. In the streets of Welland Estate. In the life of a little boy named Ricky Neve. And that is where our story truly begins. Before the murder, before the headlines, before the endless debates about suspects and police mistakes, there was a place. A place that looked ordinary. A place that, at first glance, seemed no different from hundreds of working-class housing estates scattered across England in the early 1990s. A place where children rode bicycles along cracked pavements. Where laundry fluttered from backyard clotheslines when the weather allowed. Where neighbors knew one another's faces, even if they didn't always know their names. A place where life moved forward 1 week at a time. That place was Welland Estate, Peterborough. And in the autumn of 1994, nobody living there could have imagined that their neighborhood was about to become known across the entire country for one terrible reason. Peterborough sits in Cambridgeshire, in the east of England, a city that has always existed somewhere between Old and New Britain. Ancient churches stood beside modern developments. Historic streets blended into expanding housing projects. Factories, warehouses, shops, schools, and residential estates formed a patchwork landscape shaped by decades of economic change. By the early 1990s, Britain itself was changing. The country was emerging from difficult economic years. Many communities were still struggling with unemployment. Social services were stretched thin. Housing estates built with optimism in earlier decades were beginning to show signs of wear. Some neighborhoods thrived. Others faced growing challenges. Welland Estate belonged somewhere in between. It was not the most dangerous place in Peterborough. Nor was it the most prosperous. For many residents, it was simply home. Rows of brick houses lined winding roads. Footpaths connected clusters of homes. Small patches of grass separated buildings that had long ago lost the fresh appearance they once possessed. Children played football in open areas. Teenagers gathered near shops and bus stops. Parents hurried between work, school runs, and household responsibilities. Life there was rarely glamorous. But it was familiar. Predictable. Comfortably ordinary. On cold mornings, people emerged from front doors carrying school bags, lunchboxes, and travel mugs of tea. Cars struggled to start in the winter chill. School children walked in groups, their breath visible in the air. Dogs barked behind fences. The scent of damp grass lingered over the estate after rainfall. For most residents, these details were so routine they barely noticed them. Yet looking back after the tragedy, many would remember them with startling clarity. Memory has a strange habit of preserving ordinary moments once they become connected to extraordinary events. People would later remember where they were standing, what they were wearing, what the weather felt like, which direction they had been walking. The neighborhood itself became frozen in memory. A snapshot of life just before everything changed. At the center of this community lived a little boy named Ricky Neve. Born on March 4, 1988, Ricky entered a world that was already complicated. His childhood was not the storybook version many people imagine when they think of 6-year-old children. There were challenges, instability, concerns that existed long before the murder investigation ever began. To understand the events that followed, it is important to understand the reality of Ricky's life. Not the version later created by media headlines. Not the simplified version often repeated in documentaries. The real life. The human life. The life of a child growing up within circumstances he did not choose. Ricky lived with his mother, Ruth Neve, and his sisters. The family occupied a modest home on the estate. From the outside, it appeared unremarkable. Another house among many. Another family navigating the difficulties of everyday life. But behind closed doors, things were often more complicated. Authorities had become involved with the family before the murder. Social services had received reports. Concerns had been raised. Questions existed regarding the welfare of the children. These issues would later play a major role in shaping the direction of the murder investigation. But in 1994, they existed mostly in the background. Pieces of a larger picture not yet fully understood. For Ricky, childhood unfolded within that environment. Like many children, he adapted to the world around him because it was the only world he knew. Friends later described him as energetic, curious, restless. The kind of child who rarely remained still for long. He possessed the boundless energy that often seems to define young boys. The energy that drives children to explore every pathway, climb every structure, and ask endless questions about the world. Photographs from the period show a boy with blonde hair and bright eyes. A face carrying the innocence that only childhood can create. Looking at those photographs today is difficult. Not because they reveal what would happen. They do not. That is precisely what makes them heartbreaking. Nothing in those images hints at the future. Nothing suggests tragedy. Nothing suggests that his life would become the center of one of Britain's most controversial murder investigations. He looks exactly as a 6-year-old should. Young. Curious. Vulnerable. Human. That vulnerability is important to remember. Because when people discuss true crime, there is always a risk that victims become symbols rather than individuals. Names attached to court records. Faces attached to documentaries. Stories attached to legal outcomes. Ricky was more than a victim. He was a child experiencing life one day at a time. He attended school. He interacted with neighbors. He played in the spaces available to him. He moved through Welland Estate with the casual confidence common among children who believe they understand their surroundings. And in many ways, they do. Children learn neighborhoods differently than adults. Adults notice property values, traffic patterns, and crime statistics. Children notice shortcuts, hidden corners, the best places to play, the fastest routes home, the small adventures scattered throughout ordinary streets. Welland Estate contained all of those things. Narrow paths connecting residential areas. Open spaces where children gathered. Clusters of trees creating natural hiding places during games. Wooded sections that seemed mysterious and exciting rather than threatening. Places adults barely noticed often became entire worlds for children. The wooded area where Ricky would later be found was one such place. Before the murder, it was simply part of the landscape. A patch of nature bordering everyday life. Residents passed nearby without concern. Children explored around it. Nobody viewed it as sinister. Nobody imagined it would become infamous. That is another unsettling aspect of this case. The crime did not occur in some distant location. It occurred within a familiar environment. A place people knew. A place people trusted. A place woven into the fabric of daily life. During the early 1990s, attitudes toward childhood independence were also different than they are today. Many children walked to school without constant supervision. Parents expected youngsters to travel short distances on their own. Neighborhoods often functioned as informal safety nets. Adults kept casual watch over local children. People assumed someone would notice if a problem occurred. The world felt smaller. Safer. Or at least it appeared that way. Ricky's daily routine reflected that reality. Walking to school was not unusual. Thousands of British children did the same thing every day. The route became familiar through repetition. Each morning looked much like the one before. The predictability created comfort. And comfort often creates vulnerability. Because danger rarely announces itself. It hides inside routine. Inside familiarity. Inside the assumption that today will be like yesterday. As autumn deepened into late November, Peterborough began preparing for winter. The days grew shorter. Sunrise arrived later. Darkness came earlier. Cold winds swept across open spaces. Trees shed their final leaves. The landscape adopted the muted colors of the season. Gray skies became common. Rain arrived frequently. The cheerful energy of summer had long disappeared. Residents spent more time indoors. Children hurried home before darkness settled over the estate. The approach of Christmas was still visible, but distant. Life continued in its ordinary rhythm. School days. Work shifts. Shopping trips. Television programs. Family routines. Nothing appeared unusual. Nothing suggested that the coming weeks would bring national attention to Welland Estate. Yet beneath the surface, subtle tensions existed. Like many working-class communities of the era, the neighborhood faced social challenges. Economic uncertainty affected families. Government services struggled to meet growing demands. Some households experienced instability. Others battled poverty. Many residents worked hard simply to maintain normal lives. These pressures did not define the community. But they formed part of its reality. And they created an environment where vulnerable children sometimes slipped through the cracks. When discussing the murder of Ricky Neve, it is tempting to focus exclusively on the crime itself. The investigation. The suspect. The courtroom. But understanding the setting matters because crimes emerge from contexts. They happen within real communities filled with real people. The story begins long before the moment of violence. It begins in neighborhoods. In family circumstances. In everyday interactions. In the countless ordinary moments that eventually lead toward extraordinary tragedy. By November 1994, all the pieces were already in place. The estate. The family. The child. The future killer. Though nobody knew it yet, their lives were already moving toward a collision that would alter them forever. The streets of Welland Estate remained quiet. Children continued walking to school. Parents continued their routines. Neighbors exchanged greetings. Life looked normal. And perhaps that is the most chilling detail of all. Because when viewed from a distance, nothing appeared wrong. No warning signs echoed through the neighborhood. No obvious threat stalked the streets. No one looked out of their window and predicted the horror that was coming. The storm had already formed. It simply had not arrived yet. And in just a matter of days, a small housing estate in Peterborough would become the center of a tragedy that Britain would remember for generations. To outsiders, the house looked ordinary. a modest residence among dozens of similar homes scattered throughout Welland Estate. Nothing about its brick walls attracted attention. Nothing about its front door suggested that social workers, police officers, and child welfare officials would one day spend years examining what happened inside. People passed by every day without giving it a second glance. Children played nearby. Neighbors walked past on their way to work. The rhythms of estate life continued around it. Yet behind those walls lived a family whose struggles were becoming increasingly difficult to ignore. And at the center of that family was a little boy named Ricky. Long before newspapers printed his photograph. Long before television crews arrived in Peterborough. Long before detectives debated theories and suspects. There was simply a child trying to navigate a world far more complicated than any 6-year-old should have to understand. Children are remarkably adaptable. They accept circumstances that adults might find shocking because they have nothing else against which to compare them. What appears unstable to an outsider can feel normal to a child. What appears chaotic can become routine. What appears troubling can simply become life. For Ricky, family life existed within that reality. His mother, Ruth Neve, faced significant personal struggles. Over time, those struggles attracted the attention of social services. Concerns emerged regarding the welfare of the children. Reports accumulated. Meetings took place. Professionals discussed possible interventions. The situation became serious enough that authorities began monitoring the household. This fact would later become one of the most important elements in the entire murder investigation. But in the years before the crime, it was primarily viewed as a child welfare issue. A troubled family requiring oversight. A household facing difficulties. One among many similar cases confronting social service agencies throughout Britain during the early 1990s. The challenge facing authorities was familiar. How do you protect children while keeping families together? How do you determine when concerns justify intervention? How do you separate rumor from reality? These questions rarely produce easy answers. Every family possesses complexities invisible to outsiders. Every investigation uncovers contradictory information. And every decision carries consequences. In the Neve household, those consequences would eventually intersect with one of the most infamous murder investigations in modern British history. For now, however, life continued. Ricky attended school. He interacted with classmates. He wandered through the estate. He experienced childhood in all its messy unpredictability. Those who knew him often described a boy full of energy. The kind of child who seemed constantly in motion. A child capable of moving rapidly from laughter to frustration and back again. A child with endless curiosity. Teachers sometimes encounter children who seem too large for the classrooms containing them. Not physically larger. Emotionally larger. Children whose personalities fill spaces. Children who leave impressions. Ricky appears to have been one of those children. His life was not easy. Yet he remained unmistakably a child. That distinction matters. Because discussions about his family circumstances can sometimes overshadow his individuality. It becomes easy to view him only through the lens of social service reports or later court proceedings. But before becoming a victim, he was a living person. A boy with favorite activities. Favorite places. Favorite people. Dreams too young to be fully formed. And like many children his age, he moved through the world with a mixture of confidence and vulnerability. The confidence came from familiarity. The vulnerability came from being 6 years old. Those two qualities often coexist in childhood. Young children believe they understand dangers better than they actually do. They recognize obvious threats. But they struggle to identify hidden ones. That reality creates opportunities for manipulation. Especially by older children and adults. Especially by individuals who understand how trust works. Especially by those willing to exploit it. Looking back, one of the most haunting aspects of the Ricky Neve case is how ordinary everything appeared before the tragedy. No dramatic event signaled approaching danger. No major confrontation announced itself. No obvious warning suddenly emerged. Instead, life unfolded through countless small moments. Breakfasts, school mornings, conversations, walks through familiar streets. The ordinary details that make up childhood. And yet, beneath the surface, another story was developing. A story hidden from most of the community. A story involving another young person. Someone living in the same general environment. Someone whose life intersected with Ricky's in ways nobody yet understood. Years later, investigators would examine that individual extensively. They would study behavioral patterns, interview witnesses, analyze old reports, search for signs that might explain the unimaginable. What they discovered painted a deeply troubling picture. But in 1994, those findings remained unknown. The future killer existed largely beneath the radar. An unsettling reality when viewed through hindsight. Because hindsight changes everything. Once people know the outcome, they begin identifying clues that previously seemed insignificant. They revisit old events and assign new meanings. They connect dots invisible at the time. This process is natural. Yet it can create the illusion that tragedy was inevitable. In truth, it rarely feels inevitable beforehand. Life seldom provides clear warnings. Most disasters appear obvious only after they occur. That principle applied to Welland Estate. Residents did not wake each morning fearing that a child murderer lived among them. Parents worried about everyday concerns. Bills. Employment. School performance. Family responsibilities. The possibility of a shocking homicide barely entered their thoughts. Children continued playing together, walking together, exploring together. The assumption of safety remained largely intact. And for good reason. Violent child murders are extraordinarily rare. Most communities never experience them. Most families never imagine becoming connected to such events. That sense of normalcy shaped daily life throughout the estate. Ricky's family existed within that environment. Despite ongoing concerns, routines persisted. School schedules. Household responsibilities. Neighborhood interactions. Life moved forward one day at a time. Autumn deepened. November advanced. Temperatures dropped. The estate adopted the muted atmosphere of approaching winter. Bare branches stretched across grey skies. Rainwater collected along curbs and pathways. The daylight hours grew shorter. Mornings often began under overcast clouds. The season carried a certain heaviness. Not dramatic. Not oppressive. Simply the familiar character of an English winter approaching. For children, however, seasons rarely matter as much as adults imagine. Playgrounds remain playgrounds. Friends remain friends. Adventures remain adventures. The world retains its possibilities. Ricky was no exception. He continued moving through his small universe with the resilience common among children. Whatever difficulties existed around him, he still experienced moments of joy. Moments of excitement. Moments of wonder. Children possess an extraordinary ability to find happiness even within imperfect circumstances. That ability makes stories like this especially painful. Because it reminds us how much potential was lost. Not merely a life. An entire future. A future that never received the chance to unfold. As authorities monitored the Neve household, they documented concerns regarding parenting and child welfare. These records would later become highly significant. Investigators examining the murder inevitably encountered them. Prosecutors examined them. Journalists discussed them. Public opinion became influenced by them. The documents created a narrative. And narratives can be powerful. Sometimes too powerful. When people encounter troubling information, they naturally attempt to fit new events into existing frameworks. If a family already appears troubled, suspicion often follows. If concerns already exist, they can influence interpretations of later events. This psychological tendency affects everyone. Police officers, journalists, neighbors, even experienced investigators. Nobody is entirely immune. The danger arises when assumptions begin replacing evidence. That danger would become critically important in the years ahead. Because as concern surrounding Ruth Neve increased, attention increasingly concentrated upon her. Each new detail seemed to reinforce existing suspicions. Each report appeared to strengthen a particular theory. And gradually, almost imperceptibly, alternative possibilities received less attention. At the time, few people recognized the risk. The focus seemed understandable. Perhaps even logical. Yet logic can become dangerous when built upon incomplete foundations. Meanwhile, elsewhere in the community, another story continued developing. A story involving behaviors that would later alarm investigators. Behaviors suggesting interests and impulses far outside normal childhood development. At the time, these signs remained fragmented, scattered, disconnected. Nobody assembled them into a complete picture. Nobody fully appreciated their significance. The future offender remained largely invisible. Not because evidence was entirely absent, but because evidence often means little until someone understands what they are looking at. That lesson would eventually define the Ricky Neve case. The difference between seeing and understanding. Between collecting information and recognizing its importance. Between knowing facts and recognizing truth. As November 1994 approached its final days, those distinctions still lay hidden beneath the surface. The estate carried on. Children attended school. Parents followed routines. Life remained ordinary. The future appeared unknowable. Yet beneath that appearance, events were moving steadily toward a devastating conclusion. Every person involved was approaching a moment that would alter their lives forever. Ricky did not know it. His family did not know it. His neighbors did not know it. Even the individual who would later stand accused of murder may not yet have fully understood the consequences of what was coming. The collision point remained just ahead. Invisible. Waiting. And that is perhaps the most unsettling aspect of all. The final days before tragedy often look exactly like every other day. Nothing dramatic announces itself. No music changes. No warning lights flash. Life simply continues. Until suddenly it doesn't. For the residents of Welland Estate, that moment was rapidly approaching. The estate still slept peacefully beneath grey November skies. Children still prepared for school. Parents still planned for another ordinary week. The future still seemed open. Yet history was already moving toward them. One step at a time. 1 hour at a time. One ordinary morning away from becoming a nightmare that Britain would remember for decades. By the final week of November 1994, winter was beginning to settle over Peterborough. Not with dramatic snowstorms or fierce blizzards. English winters rarely arrived that way. Instead, they crept in quietly. The mornings became darker. The afternoons seemed shorter. Cold air lingered over streets long after sunrise. The trees standing throughout Welland Estate had surrendered most of their leaves, leaving behind skeletal branches that stretched across pale grey skies. The colours of summer had vanished months earlier. Even autumn was fading. What remained was a landscape caught between seasons. Brown grass. Wet pavement. Bare hedges. Mud-darkened pathways. Everything carried the subdued tones of approaching winter. For most residents, life continued without interruption. The approaching Christmas season had already begun making its presence felt. Shop windows displayed decorations. Television advertisements promoted toys and holiday sales. Children talked about gifts they hoped to receive. Families discussed plans for the coming weeks. The excitement of the holidays lingered somewhere in the distance. Not close enough to touch, but close enough to anticipate. The contrast would later feel almost unbearable. Because while people prepared for celebrations, an unimaginable tragedy was already drawing near. One of the cruelest truths about human life is that disaster rarely announces itself. There is no warning siren. No visible countdown. No signal visible only to those about to suffer loss. People laugh. Make plans. Argue about ordinary things. Drink coffee. Watch television. Go to work. Walk to school. Completely unaware that the final chapter of someone's story has already begun. That was the reality throughout Welland Estate during those final days of November. The community existed inside a bubble of normality. Children raced along footpaths. Teenagers gathered in familiar corners of the estate. Parents worried about bills, school reports, and household responsibilities. The future seemed ordinary, predictable, safe. Looking back from the perspective of nearly 3 decades later, it is tempting to search those days for signs, warnings, red flags, moments that should have alerted someone. But history is rarely that generous. Most tragedies reveal their meaning only afterward. At the time, they are hidden among countless ordinary moments. The final week before Ricky's disappearance was filled with those moments. Nothing remarkable. Nothing dramatic. Simply the small details that make up everyday life. Children arriving at school carrying backpacks. Neighbors exchanging greetings. Families eating dinner together. People walking through the estate without paying attention to who passed them. Life moved according to routines so familiar that nobody consciously noticed them. That familiarity created comfort. And comfort created vulnerability. For children especially, routine becomes a kind of invisible shield. The same streets. The same faces. The same route to school. The same shortcuts through the estate. Each successful journey reinforces the belief that tomorrow will be the same. Children trust repetition. If something has always been safe, they assume it will remain safe. That assumption is one of childhood's defining characteristics. It is also one of childhood's greatest risks. Ricky moved through the world with that same trust. At 6 years old, his understanding of danger was naturally limited. Like most children his age, he likely divided the world into simple categories. People he knew. People he didn't. Places that felt familiar. Places that felt unfamiliar. The complexities adults use to evaluate risk simply did not exist inside a child's mind. And that is precisely why children depend upon the adults around them. Not because they lack intelligence. Because they lack experience. They have not yet learned how quickly ordinary situations can become dangerous. The final days before the murder unfolded beneath that reality. A little boy continued living his life. A community continued following its routines. And somewhere nearby, another young person continued moving through the same environment. Their paths already existed within the same world. The same streets. The same estate. The same collection of footpaths and open spaces. Yet nobody understood how catastrophic that intersection would become. One of the unsettling aspects of this case is how geographically small it was. The distances involved were minimal. The locations familiar. Nothing about the physical setting suggested the scale of the tragedy that would emerge. When people imagine notorious murders, they often picture dramatic locations. Remote forests. Abandoned buildings. Dark alleyways. The murder of Ricky Neve shattered that expectation. The events occurred within a community. Within sight of everyday life. Within a landscape occupied by families and children. That proximity made the crime feel personal. Not only for those who knew Ricky. For the entire community. Residents later described how the murder changed the way they viewed familiar places. Footpaths no longer felt harmless. Wooded areas no longer felt ordinary. Even routine walks acquired new meaning. Fear has a way of transforming geography. Locations associated with trauma become impossible to see in the same way again. The wooded area near Welland Estate would eventually become one of those places. But in late November 1994, it remained simply another feature of the neighborhood. A patch of trees. A quiet corner. A place people barely noticed. The future significance of that location remained invisible. As the final weekend before the disappearance passed, Peterborough settled into another ordinary cycle of work and school. Monday approached. Parents prepared children for the week ahead. School uniforms were organized. Lunches planned. Alarm clocks set. Across Britain, millions of families engaged in identical rituals. The routine repeated itself every week. Predictable. Reliable. Comforting. The Neve household was no different. Another school day was coming. Another Monday morning. Nothing about the calendar suggested that November 28th would become one of the most discussed dates in British true crime history. The hours continued passing. Night replaced day. Day replaced night. The estate slept and awakened according to its usual rhythm. Streetlights illuminated quiet roads. Windows glowed against the darkness. Televisions flickered inside living rooms. Children climbed into bed. Parents finished evening routines. The world kept turning. Unaware. That word appears again and again when examining major tragedies. Unaware. Because awareness belongs to hindsight. Not to the people living through events in real time. Nobody knew that detectives would spend decades examining these streets. Nobody knew that journalists would revisit this estate again and again. Nobody knew that courtroom proceedings nearly 30 years in the future would still be discussing events that had not yet occurred. Most importantly, nobody knew that a little boy's life was nearing its end. The tragedy of true crime often lies not only in death itself but in the ordinary moments immediately preceding it. The final breakfast. The final conversation. The final walk. The final laugh. At the time, these moments appear insignificant. Only afterward do they become precious. People search their memories desperately, trying to hold on to details, trying to remember exact words, trying to preserve fragments of someone who is suddenly gone. That process would eventually consume many people connected to this case. Family members, neighbors, teachers, investigators, everyone searching for meaning inside memories. Everyone attempting to understand how an ordinary school morning transformed into a national tragedy. But before that morning arrived, there was still time. A few remaining hours of normal life. A few remaining hours before headlines. Before police searches. Before television cameras. Before grief. The estate rested beneath the cold skies of late November. The future remained unwritten. Or at least it seemed that way. Because while residents slept peacefully, history was already moving forward. Toward a 6-year-old boy. Toward a wooded area near his home. Toward a chain of events that would leave investigators searching for answers for almost 3 decades. And at the center of that approaching storm stood Ricky Neve himself. Not the victim. Not the headline. Not the subject of documentaries and court proceedings. Just Ricky. A little boy. A son. A brother. A child with dreams, fears, habits, and routines. A child whose story deserves to be understood before his final day begins. Because every victim is more than the worst thing that happened to them. Every victim had a life before the crime. A personality before the headlines. A story before the tragedy. And to truly understand the impact of what was lost on November 28, 1994, we must first understand the boy at the center of it all. Who was Ricky Neve? What was he like when cameras were not watching? How did teachers see him? How did friends remember him? What kind of child walked through Welland Estate during those final days, unaware of the fate waiting ahead? The answers to those questions lead us into the next chapter of this story. A chapter not about murder. Not about suspects. Not about investigations. But about a little boy whose life was far more important than the crime that eventually took it away. Before we examine the darkness that followed, we must first remember the child who stood in its path. And that child was Ricky Neve. When people remember famous murder cases, they often remember the crime. They remember the investigation, the courtroom, the suspects, the shocking revelations, the newspaper headlines. But somewhere along the way, the victim can begin to disappear. Not physically, symbolically. Their identity slowly becomes overshadowed by the event that ended their life. The tragedy becomes larger than the person. The crime becomes more famous than the child. And that is why it is important to stop for a moment and ask a simple question. Who was Ricky Neve? Not the victim. Not the photograph shown on television. Not the name attached to a police file. Who was the little boy before the world learned how his story ended? Because before there was a murder investigation, there was a child waking up each morning and trying to make sense of the world around him. A child who laughed, who played, who became excited about small things, who experienced disappointment, curiosity, fear, and happiness just like any other 6-year-old. The boy at the center of this story was born on March 4, 1988. His life began quietly, far removed from the public attention that would one day surround his name. Like all children, he entered the world carrying endless possibilities. A future still unwritten. A future that stretched far beyond the imagination of anyone looking into his crib. Nobody could have predicted what was coming. Nobody could have imagined that decades later strangers would still be discussing his life. For the people who knew him during those early years, he was simply Ricky. A little boy growing up in Peterborough. Nothing more. Nothing less. Children experience the world differently than adults. Adults focus on responsibilities, deadlines, bills, long-term plans. Children focus on what is immediately in front of them. The game they are playing. The friend standing beside them. The puddle they want to jump into. The story they want to tell. The adventure they imagine waiting around the next corner. For Ricky, life was often lived in those moments. People who encountered him frequently described a child overflowing with energy. The kind of child who struggled to sit still. The kind of child who seemed perpetually in motion. One moment running. The next climbing. The next talking. The next disappearing around a corner in search of something new. Every school seems to have children like that. Children whose energy arrives before they do. Children who leave an impression because they experience the world at full volume. Teachers remember them. Classmates remember them. Neighbors remember them. Not because they are trying to stand out. Because they simply cannot help it. Ricky appears to have been one of those children. There was a liveliness about him. A spark. An unpredictability that often accompanies childhood. Looking at photographs today, it is easy to notice his eyes first. Bright. Alert. Curious. The eyes of a child who still believed the world was full of discoveries. There is something particularly heartbreaking about photographs of victims taken before tragedy strikes. Not because they reveal what is coming. They do not. They reveal the opposite. They reveal innocence. Potential. Possibility. Every photograph becomes a reminder of everything that should have happened afterward. Every birthday that never arrived. Every experience that never occurred. Every future memory erased before it could exist. Ricky's photographs carry that same emotional weight. They show a child. Not a victim. A child. And that distinction matters. Because murder steals more than life. It steals identity. The public often learns how someone died before learning how they lived. The details of the crime become famous. The details of the person disappear. In Ricky's case, the reality was even more complicated. His childhood unfolded within difficult circumstances. The challenges facing his family were real. Authorities had already become involved. Concerns existed. Social services had monitored the household. Reports had been filed. Questions had been raised regarding the welfare of the children. These facts cannot be ignored. They formed part of the environment in which Ricky grew up. Yet there is another danger here. A danger common in true crime. When discussing troubled backgrounds, people sometimes begin seeing children only through the lens of dysfunction. Only through problems. Only through hardship. The result is an incomplete picture. Because children are never defined entirely by the circumstances surrounding them. Even difficult childhoods contain laughter, friendships, dreams, moments of joy. Ricky's life was no different. Despite the challenges present around him, he remained a child capable of happiness. Capable of excitement. Capable of imagining a future. Those who knew him often recalled a boy who loved being outside. This was hardly unusual. The early 1990s belonged to a generation of children who spent much of their free time exploring neighborhoods, fields, and parks. Long before smartphones and social media transformed childhood, adventure often meant simply stepping outside the front door. Children created entire worlds from ordinary surroundings. A patch of grass became a football stadium. A cluster of trees became a secret hideout. A pathway became an expedition route. The imagination filled every empty space. For Ricky, Welland Estate provided that landscape. The estate may have appeared ordinary to adults, but to children it offered opportunities. Routes to explore. Friends to visit. Corners to investigate. Every day contained the possibility of something interesting. That sense of exploration shaped many of his routines. It also contributed to a level of independence common among children of that era. Many youngsters walked short distances alone. Visited friends independently. Traveled familiar routes without adult supervision. Parents considered it normal. Society considered it normal. The culture surrounding childhood was different. The dangers that would later dominate public discussions about child safety felt more distant. Less immediate. The murder of children like Ricky would contribute significantly to changing those perceptions. But in 1994, many families still believed local neighborhoods offered a degree of protection. That belief influenced daily life. And daily life shaped Ricky's world. School represented another important part of that world. Like most 6-year-olds, he spent much of his time surrounded by teachers and classmates. Schools are often among the most revealing places in a child's life. Teachers see behaviors parents never witness. Classmates observe personalities adults rarely notice. Friendships emerge. Conflicts develop. Individual characteristics become visible. While accounts vary, a consistent image emerges. Ricky was energetic. Sometimes challenging. Sometimes difficult to manage. Yet undeniably alive with personality. Children rarely fit neatly into categories. They are complicated. One moment affectionate. The next stubborn. One moment cheerful. The next frustrated. That emotional fluidity is part of childhood itself. Ricky appears to have embodied that complexity. The result was a child who left impressions on people. Not necessarily because he was exceptional. Because he was memorable. And memorable children often remain vivid in people's minds long after years have passed. That would become important later. After the murder. After the investigations. After the media attention. Many people would be asked to remember Ricky. To describe him. To explain what kind of boy he had been. Their memories became fragments of a life abruptly interrupted. No single memory could fully capture him. But together they created a portrait. A portrait of a child trying to navigate a complicated world. One of the saddest realities surrounding vulnerable children is that they often become accustomed to circumstances adults recognize as troubling. What appears unstable becomes routine. What appears difficult becomes normal. Children adapt because adaptation is how they survive. Ricky grew up within that reality. He did not choose it. He inherited it. Yet despite everything, he continued moving forward. Attending school. Exploring his neighborhood. Building relationships. Living the only life available to him. Looking back now, knowing how his story ends, there is a temptation to search for signs of tragedy. To identify moments that somehow foreshadow the future. But life rarely works that way. Most children who experience difficult circumstances grow up without becoming victims of violent crime. Most vulnerable children survive. Most continue building lives despite adversity. Nothing about Ricky's existence guaranteed what happened next. That fact makes the outcome even more devastating. Because his death was not inevitable. It was not destiny. It was not the unavoidable conclusion of a troubled childhood. It was the result of a decision made by another human being. A decision that stole every possibility waiting ahead of him. The birthdays. The friendships. The adulthood he never reached. Everything vanished because of a single encounter. Yet during the weeks before that encounter, none of those losses were visible. Ricky remained focused on the present. The way children always are. Tomorrow felt distant. Next year felt unimaginable. The future existed only as an abstract idea. What mattered were immediate experiences. The next day at school. The next conversation. The next adventure. The next ordinary moment. And there were many ordinary moments during the autumn of 1994. Moments no one considered important at the time. Moments that later became precious because they could never happen again. A smile. A laugh. A walk through the estate. A conversation with a friend. Each became part of a finite collection. A life measured not by years, but by memories. As November approached its end, Ricky continued moving through the routines of childhood. Unaware that people would one day analyze those routines in extraordinary detail. Unaware that investigators would reconstruct his final movements. Unaware that journalists would revisit his story decades later. Most importantly, unaware that his time was running out. The tragedy of this case is not simply that a child died. The tragedy is that he never had the opportunity to become anything more than a child. His story was interrupted before it could evolve. Frozen permanently at 6 years old. Preserved forever in photographs and memories. And as the final days of November 1994 unfolded across Peterborough, Ricky Neve remained exactly what he had always been. A little boy trying to live his life. A little boy with no idea that someone was already moving toward a decision that would change everything. A decision that would transform him from a child known only to family, friends, teachers, and neighbors into a name remembered throughout Britain. A name that would endure for decades. A name that would become synonymous with one of the country's most haunting unsolved murders. But before that happened, there was still time. Time for one more ordinary morning. Time for one more walk through Welland Estate. Time for one more day that appeared completely normal. And in the next chapter of his story, that ordinary day will begin. There is a tendency, when examining true crime cases, to view victims through the lens of their final hours. Everything becomes connected to the crime. Every memory becomes evidence. Every photograph becomes foreshadowing. Every detail feels as though it is pointing toward the tragedy that follows. But life does not unfold that way. For the people actually living it, there is no dramatic music. No warning narration. No visible countdown. There is only the present moment. And for 6-year-old Ricky Neve, the present moment was still childhood. To understand what was lost, we must spend time in that world. Not the world of detectives and courtrooms. The world of a little boy. A world measured in days rather than years. In school mornings rather than life plans. In playground conversations rather than future ambitions. Children experience time differently. A week feels long. A month feels enormous. A birthday feels distant. Their lives are built from immediate experiences. The next game. The next lesson. The next adventure. The next opportunity to explore. That perspective shaped Ricky's life. Those who encountered him often remembered a child who seemed constantly drawn toward movement. Stillness did not suit him. He wanted to be outside. To be active. To engage with the world around him. The housing estate where he lived became more than just a neighborhood. For a child, it became an entire universe. Adults saw roads, houses, and footpaths. Children saw possibilities. Every corner carried potential. Every shortcut felt exciting. Every open space offered another chance for exploration. The estate was filled with familiar landmarks known intimately by local children. Small grassy areas. Clusters of trees. Walkways connecting rows of homes. Places that seemed ordinary to adults often became important meeting points for youngsters. Children learned the geography of neighborhoods differently. Not through maps. Through experience. Through repetition. Through adventure. Ricky knew those surroundings. He understood which routes led where. Which paths connected different parts of the estate. Which areas children frequented. The environment felt familiar. Comfortable. Safe. That sense of familiarity is important. Because trust often grows from repetition. When children travel the same route repeatedly without incident, they begin to believe nothing bad can happen there. The route becomes part of everyday life. The environment becomes predictable. And predictability creates confidence. Looking back after the murder, many people struggled with that reality. The crime had occurred in a place that felt known. A place integrated into daily routines. Not somewhere distant or frightening. The contrast between familiarity and violence became one of the most disturbing aspects of the entire case. But for now, none of that existed in Ricky's mind. His world remained centered on childhood concerns. Children often possess an extraordinary ability to focus on simple joys. A favorite television program. A conversation with a friend. A planned activity later in the day. The excitement of an upcoming holiday. The approach of Christmas likely occupied at least some of his thoughts during November 1994. The season was approaching. Decorations were appearing. School children throughout Britain were beginning to feel the anticipation that accompanies the final weeks before winter holidays. That excitement forms part of childhood itself. The feeling that something enjoyable waits just ahead. A reward. A celebration. A break from routine. The future, as far as most children are concerned, usually contains possibilities rather than dangers. Ricky was no different. Despite the difficulties surrounding parts of his home life, he remained capable of looking forward. Capable of imagining better days. Capable of finding enjoyment in ordinary experiences. This is one reason why child victims often leave such profound emotional impacts on communities. They represent unrealized futures. Not merely lives lost. Lives interrupted. Potential erased. Possibilities stolen. When adults die, society often mourns what they accomplished. When children die, society mourns what they never had the opportunity to become. That distinction lies at the heart of many child homicide cases. And it certainly lies at the heart of this one. As investigators later reconstructed Ricky's life, they discovered countless ordinary details. The kinds of details that rarely appear in headlines. The kinds of details that become important only after someone is gone. How he spent his time. How he interacted with people. How he moved through the community. Each recollection became valuable because it helped restore something often lost in criminal investigations. His humanity. One challenge faced by families of murder victims is watching strangers discuss their loved ones primarily as evidence. Case files reduce people to facts. Dates. Locations. Witness statements. Forensic findings. Necessary information, certainly. But incomplete. No document can fully capture a person's personality. No police report can adequately describe a child's laughter. No courtroom testimony can reconstruct every moment of joy. Those elements survive only through memory. And memories, though imperfect, often reveal truths unavailable anywhere else. People remembered Ricky as energetic, curious, independent, sometimes difficult, sometimes affectionate. a combination familiar to anyone who has spent time around young children. The reality of childhood is rarely simple. Children can be stubborn one moment and loving the next. Defiant in the morning. Playful in the afternoon. Emotional by evening. Those contradictions do not represent flaws. They represent humanity. Ricky possessed that humanity. He was not a symbol. Not yet. He was a child. One aspect of his life that later attracted significant attention involved his vulnerability. Children living within unstable circumstances often develop behaviors that differ from their peers. Some become withdrawn. Others become unusually independent. Some seek attention. Others avoid it. There is no universal response. Every child adapts differently. In Ricky's case, adaptation appears to have taken the form of resilience. He continued moving forward. Continued exploring. Continued engaging with the world around him. The strength children display under difficult circumstances can be remarkable. Yet resilience is not protection. A child may appear capable, may appear independent, may appear confident, and still remain vulnerable. Especially when encountering someone older, someone manipulative, someone willing to exploit trust. That vulnerability would eventually become central to the tragedy. But before we arrive there, it is important to understand another reality. The person who would later be identified as responsible for Ricky's death existed within the same broader environment. Not as a mysterious stranger emerging from nowhere. Not as an unknown outsider. But as another young person moving through nearby spaces. Another individual whose life was unfolding simultaneously. At the time, nobody connected those stories. Nobody recognized how dangerous that intersection would become. The future offender remained largely invisible. This fact continues to disturb investigators and psychologists alike. Because hindsight reveals troubling signs. Patterns that would later appear significant. Behaviors suggesting something darker beneath the surface. Yet during the weeks before the murder, those concerns remained fragmented. Scattered among different observations. Disconnected from one another. No single piece appeared sufficient to reveal the larger picture. And so life continued. The estate remained active. Children attended school. Families followed routines. The future approached unnoticed. For Ricky, each day likely felt much like the one before. Wake up. Prepare for school. Navigate familiar streets. Interact with familiar people. Return home. Repeat. Routine creates a sense of permanence. Children assume tomorrow will resemble today because that has always been their experience. The possibility that life can end suddenly remains beyond their understanding. That innocence is both beautiful and heartbreaking. Beautiful because it allows childhood wonder to exist. Heartbreaking because it leaves children dependent upon others for protection. When that protection fails, the consequences are devastating. As November progressed toward its final days, Peterborough settled deeper into winter rhythms. The weather grew colder. The daylight shorter. The atmosphere heavier. Yet these seasonal changes affected adults more than children. Children adapt quickly. They continue playing despite cold temperatures. Continue exploring despite gray skies. Continue finding adventure in ordinary places. Ricky appears to have embraced that spirit. The world around him remained full of possibilities. And perhaps that is why his story resonates so deeply. Because he never lost the ability to see those possibilities. Even while living within challenging circumstances. Even while navigating a complicated environment. Even while moving toward a future he could not foresee. He remained a child. A child capable of wonder. A child capable of trust. A child capable of believing that tomorrow would arrive as expected. As historians and criminologists examine cases like this, they often focus on systems. Investigations. Policies. Procedures. Institutional failures. Those discussions matter. They help societies learn. They help prevent future tragedies. But there is another responsibility as well. To remember the individual. To preserve the humanity at the center of the story. To ensure that the victim remains more than a case number. More than a headline. More than a legal proceeding. Ricky Neve deserves that remembrance. Not because his death became famous. Because his life mattered. Even if it had never appeared in a newspaper. Even if no documentary had ever been produced. Even if no courtroom had ever discussed his name. His life mattered. And during the final days before his disappearance, that life was still unfolding. Still moving forward. Still filled with ordinary moments nobody realized were becoming precious. The final conversations. The final school days. The final walks through familiar streets. All of them were occurring quietly beneath the surface of history. Unnoticed. Unremarkable. And that is how tragedy often approaches. Not dramatically. Not loudly. But through ordinary days that seem destined to continue forever. As November 1994 entered its final weekend, Ricky Neve remained exactly where he belonged. In the world of childhood. A world of routines, curiosity, and trust. A world that should have protected him. A world that should have allowed him to grow older. Instead, it was carrying him toward a Monday morning that would change everything. A Monday morning that would begin like countless others. And end with an entire community searching desperately for a missing 6-year-old boy. The final memories people hold of someone are rarely recognized as final when they happen. A conversation ends. A child waves goodbye. A door closes. Someone walks away. And life continues. At least, that is what everyone expects. Nobody pauses to preserve the moment. Nobody imagines they are witnessing the last ordinary chapter of a person's story. That is why the days before November 28, 1994, carry such emotional weight when viewed through hindsight. Because for Ricky Neve, those days represented the closing pages of a childhood that should have lasted much longer. The little boy moving through Welland Estate had no awareness of what was waiting ahead. He did not know that investigators would someday reconstruct his final movements minute by minute. He did not know that witnesses would spend decades recalling small details about him. He did not know that his photograph would become known across Britain. To him, life was still unfolding normally. And perhaps that is the most heartbreaking truth of all. Ricky was not living through the beginning of a true crime story. He was living through the final days of being a child. When people discuss victims of violent crime, there is often an unconscious tendency to define them by vulnerability. To focus on what made them targets. To examine weaknesses. Risks. Circumstances. While those factors matter, they can sometimes overshadow another reality. Children are not merely vulnerable. They are hopeful. Hope shapes nearly every aspect of childhood. Children assume tomorrow exists. They assume the people around them mean well. They assume routines will continue. They assume the world is largely understandable. Those assumptions create innocence. And innocence creates trust. Trust in familiar places. Trust in familiar faces. Trust in ordinary routines. For 6 years, that trust had largely guided Ricky's understanding of the world. Whatever difficulties existed within his environment, the basic rhythm of life continued. School happened. Days passed. The sun rose. People came and went. The future remained open. That openness is what makes child homicide uniquely devastating. A murder does not simply end a life. It destroys an unwritten future. Every possibility disappears simultaneously. The adult Ricky might have become. The experiences he might have enjoyed. The relationships he might have built. The family he might have created. All erased before they could exist. Looking at childhood photographs today, it is impossible not to wonder. What would he have looked like at 16? At 25? At 40? Would he have remained energetic? Would he have left Peterborough? Would he have become a father? Would he have found happiness? Those questions have no answers. The murder stole them. And that theft extends far beyond the individual victim. Families lose futures too. Parents lose opportunities to watch children grow. Siblings lose decades of shared experiences. Friends lose relationships that never have the chance to mature. Entire communities lose people who might have contributed to the world in meaningful ways. These losses cannot be measured in court records. Yet they are among the most significant consequences of violent crime. As November drew toward its final Monday, none of those future losses were visible. The estate remained immersed in ordinary life. Streetlights switched on each evening. Children returned home from school. Television sets glowed behind curtains. Neighbors exchanged greetings. The world appeared stable. Predictable. Safe. Looking back, many residents later described how difficult it became to reconcile those memories with what followed. The neighborhood they remembered before the murder felt different from the neighborhood that existed afterward. The physical streets remained unchanged. The houses remained unchanged. The footpaths remained unchanged. But perception changed. And once perception changes, places are never quite the same again. The murder of a child alters geography. Locations become associated with grief. Landmarks acquire new meanings. Ordinary spaces become permanent reminders of tragedy. For the people of Welland Estate, that transformation was approaching rapidly. Yet on the eve of Ricky's disappearance, it still remained invisible. The estate existed in a final moment of innocence. Not perfect innocence. The community faced challenges. Families struggled. Problems existed. But innocence in another sense. The innocence of not yet knowing. The innocence of believing tomorrow would be ordinary. The innocence of assuming a 6-year-old child would return home at the end of the school day. That assumption would soon be shattered. The final portrait that emerges of Ricky is not one of tragedy. It is one of humanity. A little boy navigating childhood. Sometimes happy. Sometimes difficult. Sometimes energetic to the point of exhausting adults around him. A child with strengths and flaws. A child with a personality. A child who occupied a unique place in the lives of those who knew him. Too often, murder victims become frozen in time. They become symbols. Images. Case studies. The challenge for any true crime storyteller is resisting that simplification. Because real people are never simple. Ricky was not simply a victim waiting for a crime to occur. He was living a life. Perhaps not an easy life. Perhaps not a perfect life. But a life nonetheless. One filled with moments that mattered. One filled with experiences worth remembering. One filled with possibilities. And that is why his story deserves more than a discussion of forensic evidence and courtroom testimony. It deserves remembrance. It deserves humanity. It deserves recognition that before detectives arrived, before journalists wrote articles, before legal arguments unfolded, there was a little boy who woke up every morning expecting another day of childhood. As we move closer to the events of November 28th, it becomes increasingly important to hold on to that image. Not because it softens the horror that follows. Because it sharpens it. The more clearly we understand who Ricky was, the more profoundly we understand what was taken from him. Every child homicide creates two stories. The story of the crime. And the story of the life interrupted by it. The first story often receives more attention. The second deserves equal space. For Ricky, that second story ends here. Not because his life lacked significance. Because it was about to collide with something unimaginably cruel. The next chapter begins with a Monday morning. Cold air hanging over Peterborough. Children preparing for school. Parents following familiar routines. A housing estate waking up to another ordinary day. Nothing appears unusual. Nothing appears threatening. Nothing suggests that by evening, panic will spread through the community. Nothing suggests that police officers will soon be searching desperately for a missing child. Nothing suggests that one of Britain's most haunting murder investigations is only hours away from beginning. Ricky wakes up that morning as he always has. A 6-year-old boy with an entire future ahead of him. By nightfall, he will be gone. And somewhere nearby, another child, 13 years old, will be carrying a secret that remains hidden for nearly 28 years. The ordinary world of Welland Estate is about to fracture. The final school journey is about to begin. And with it begins the darkest chapter of the Ricky Neve case. The chapter that changes everything. Monday, November 28, 1994, began like countless other mornings in Peterborough. The sky was still heavy with the greyness that seemed to define late autumn in eastern England. A cold dampness lingered in the air. The sun had risen, but only reluctantly, hidden behind a blanket of low clouds that cast a dull light over Welland Estate. The day carried no warning. No sign. No indication that before nightfall, an entire community would be gripped by fear. Inside homes throughout the estate, alarms had sounded. Kettles boiled. Children pulled on school uniforms. Parents rushed through familiar routines. Cars started. Front doors opened and closed. It was an ordinary Monday. The kind of day people rarely remember. The kind of day that disappears into the background of life. For 6-year-old Ricky Neve, it should have been exactly that. Another school day. Nothing more. Nothing less. The details of that morning have been examined repeatedly over the decades. Investigators reconstructed timelines. Witnesses revisited memories. Journalists analyzed every available account. Yet despite all that scrutiny, there remains something hauntingly simple about the beginning of the story. A little boy left home. And never came back. At some point during the morning, Ricky set off toward school. The route was familiar. He had traveled through the neighborhood before. The distance was not great. Nothing about the journey seemed unusual. For children growing up in Britain during the early 1990s, walking short distances independently was common. Many parents considered it a normal part of childhood. The estate itself felt familiar enough to encourage that confidence. People recognized faces. Children crossed paths regularly. The environment carried a sense of routine. A sense of predictability. Ricky stepped into that familiar world expecting another ordinary day. What happened next would remain the central mystery of the investigation for decades. Because somewhere between leaving home and reaching school, something interrupted that routine. Something altered the course of his life forever. Witnesses would later become crucial to understanding those missing hours. In the immediate aftermath of the disappearance, investigators began gathering statements from residents throughout Welland Estate. People recalled seeing Ricky that morning. Some remembered him walking through the estate. Others remembered brief interactions. Most importantly, several witnesses described seeing him in the company of an older boy. At the time, these observations seemed like only one piece of a much larger puzzle. No one yet understood their true significance. No one realized they might represent some of the most important evidence in the entire case. The image itself appeared innocent enough. A younger child. An older child. Walking together. Nothing overtly threatening. Nothing dramatic. No obvious signs of distress. If anyone passed them that morning, there would have been little reason for alarm. Children walked together all the time. Older children often interacted with younger ones. The sight would not have appeared unusual. And perhaps that normality is what makes the moment so chilling in retrospect. Because hidden inside that ordinary image was a catastrophe waiting to unfold. As the morning continued, life across Peterborough moved forward without interruption. School lessons began. Attendance registers were taken. Teachers settled students into classrooms. The machinery of an ordinary school day turned steadily onward. Then someone noticed something. Ricky wasn't there. At first, his absence may not have seemed alarming. Children occasionally arrived late. Unexpected situations occurred. A missed morning was not automatically cause for panic. But as time passed, Concern slowly began to grow. The hours moved forward. Morning became afternoon. Still no sign of Ricky. Still no explanation. Still no indication of where he might be. Meanwhile, somewhere within the estate, another story was unfolding. A story hidden from teachers, neighbors, and family members. A story taking place away from public view. The exact sequence of events remains partially obscured by time and incomplete evidence. What investigators eventually concluded, however, paints a horrifying picture. At some point after leaving home, Ricky encountered the individual who would later be identified as his killer. The encounter was likely not immediately frightening. Children rarely follow strangers into isolated areas without some form of trust or persuasion. The circumstances suggested an interaction that began without obvious violence. There may have been conversation. Perhaps a suggestion. Perhaps an invitation. Whatever happened, the result was the same. Ricky ended up moving toward a wooded area near his home. A place familiar to local children. A place close enough to seem harmless. A place where danger remained invisible until it was too late. The woodland was not deep wilderness. That fact remains one of the most disturbing elements of the case. The location sat near ordinary residential life. People lived nearby. Families carried on daily routines nearby. The sounds of the community were never far away. Yet within that small patch of woodland, a terrible act was about to occur. Investigators would later conclude that the attack happened suddenly. There was little evidence suggesting a prolonged struggle. The forensic findings indicated that Ricky had been seized unexpectedly. The assault appears to have come from behind. A method offering the victim little chance to react. Little chance to escape. Little chance to understand what was happening before it was too late. For a 6-year-old child, the imbalance of power would have been overwhelming. The attack was brutal in its simplicity. No weapon. No elaborate plan visible at the scene. Just direct violence. Personal violence. The kind requiring physical contact. The kind forcing victim and attacker into horrifying proximity. At some point during those moments, Ricky's life ended. The future that had stretched ahead of him disappeared. Every possibility vanished. The school days he would never attend. The birthdays he would never celebrate. The adulthood he would never reach. All erased inside a quiet patch of woodland on an otherwise ordinary Monday. But the horror did not end there. What happened after the killing would later become one of the most disturbing aspects of the entire case. The offender remained at the scene. Instead of fleeing immediately, actions were taken that suggested something deeply troubling about the psychology behind the crime. The body was stripped of clothing. Then positioned. Arranged deliberately. Placed in a star-like formation. The staging appeared intentional. Not accidental. Not random. This detail would later become critically important. Because staging often reveals something about the offender's mental state. It suggests purpose beyond the act of killing itself. It suggests thoughts occurring after death. Decisions being made. Behavior that investigators often view as psychologically significant. The arrangement of the body shocked experienced detectives when they eventually discovered it. Years later, prosecutors would argue that these actions reflected disturbing fantasies already present within the offender's mind. The scene appeared to indicate motivations extending beyond simple violence. And those implications would become central to understanding the killer. Yet on November 28, 1994, none of that was known. The woodland remained silent. The secret remained hidden. And as daylight began fading over Peterborough, concern about Ricky's whereabouts continued growing. At first, people searched for ordinary explanations. Perhaps he was visiting someone. Perhaps he had wandered off. Perhaps there had been a misunderstanding. Families often cling to simple possibilities before confronting darker realities. Hope survives because the alternative feels unbearable. As the afternoon slipped toward evening, that hope became increasingly difficult to maintain. Hours had passed. No confirmed sightings. No contact. No explanation. The estate that had begun the day in normality was slowly transitioning into something else. Worry. Fear. Uncertainty. Neighbors began paying closer attention. Questions circulated. People looked through familiar places. Parents checked with friends and relatives. The search expanded. Yet nobody knew where to look. Because the answer remained hidden just minutes away. Hidden within a woodland area so close that its proximity would later seem almost impossible to comprehend. At approximately 6 o'clock that evening, Ruth Neve contacted police to report her son missing. The call marked a turning point. What had been a family concern now became an official investigation. Police officers began gathering information. Descriptions were circulated. Initial inquiries started. The search for Ricky Neve had begun. At that moment, investigators still believed they were looking for a missing child. They did not yet know they were investigating a murder. They did not know that the victim was already dead. They did not know that the killer had already returned to ordinary life. And they certainly did not know that the truth would remain hidden for nearly 28 years. Night settled over Peterborough. Streetlights illuminated damp roads. Search efforts continued. Families watched from windows. Parents held their children a little closer. The atmosphere across Welland Estate changed. An uneasiness spread through the community. A feeling difficult to define but impossible to ignore. Somewhere, a 6-year-old boy was missing. And nobody knew why. As darkness deepened, hope and fear existed side by side. People prayed for good news. For a misunderstanding. For a harmless explanation. Anything but the possibility beginning to form in the back of everyone's mind. The possibility that something terrible had happened. Unfortunately, that possibility was already reality. And as the estate slept uneasily through the night, the truth waited in silence among the trees. Waiting to be discovered. Waiting to transform a missing child investigation into one of the most infamous murder cases in British history. As darkness settled over Peterborough on the evening of November 28, 1994, two very different realities existed at the same time. One reality belonged to the people searching. The other belonged to the person who already knew the truth. Throughout Welland Estate, families continued hoping that Ricky Neve would be found alive. Children sometimes disappeared for a few hours. Children occasionally wandered farther than intended. Children sometimes hid, became confused, or simply failed to return home when expected. Nobody wanted to believe something worse had happened. Hope, even fragile hope, remained easier to carry than fear. Police officers responding to the missing child report began their work methodically. Questions were asked. Descriptions were collected. Possible locations were discussed. Officers examined the details available to them. 6 years old. Male. Last seen that morning. Failed to arrive at school. Missing for many hours. Every missing child case carries urgency. But urgency increases dramatically when a child remains unaccounted for after dark. The falling temperature only intensified concerns. November nights in Cambridgeshire were cold. Not brutally cold, but cold enough to endanger a young child spending hours outdoors alone. Investigators initially considered every possibility. An accident. A misunderstanding. A runaway situation. An abduction. At that stage, nothing could be ruled out. The search widened. Officers moved through the estate. Residents joined efforts. People checked areas where children often played. Footpaths. Open fields. Parks. Garages. Alleyways. Every location that might provide an answer. Yet each search ended the same way. Nothing. No sign of Ricky. No explanation. No clue revealing where he had gone. As the evening progressed, anxiety spread throughout the community. Conversations grew quieter. More serious. Parents who had once allowed children to move freely through the neighborhood suddenly became uneasy. Doors remained open a little longer. Curtains twitched as people watched search activity outside. Telephones rang. Neighbors exchanged information. Rumors began forming almost immediately. Had someone seen him? Had anyone heard anything unusual? Was there a stranger in the area? Nobody knew. The uncertainty became its own source of fear. For Ruth Neve, the hours must have felt endless. Whatever later controversies surrounded the case, one reality remained unchanged. Her 6-year-old son was missing. And every minute that passed without answers increased the terror. The human mind reacts strangely during crises. People cycle through possibilities. Hope rises. Then collapses. Then rises again. One moment they imagine a harmless explanation. The next moment they fear the worst. The process repeats endlessly. Throughout that night, many people connected to the search likely experienced that emotional cycle. Waiting. Wondering. Praying. The estate itself seemed transformed. Places that appeared harmless during daylight acquired a different character after dark. Footpaths became shadows. Trees became silhouettes. Open spaces felt larger and emptier. The familiar environment suddenly seemed uncertain. Vulnerable. That transformation occurs in many missing child investigations. The landscape itself changes meaning. Every corner becomes a potential clue. Every dark area becomes a source of concern. Every unanswered question becomes heavier. Meanwhile, somewhere within that same landscape, the truth remained hidden. The wooded area where Ricky's body lay was not far away. That fact remains difficult to comprehend. Searchers moved through the community while the answer existed only minutes from many of them. Close enough to touch. Yet invisible. The darkness protected the secret. At least for one more night. As police gathered information, witness accounts slowly began emerging. People recalled seeing Ricky during the morning. Others remembered where they had been. Investigators documented every potentially relevant detail. Among these statements were reports describing the child in the company of an older boy. At the time, such observations represented only one lead among many. There was no immediate reason to view them as uniquely significant. Children frequently interacted with one another. The sighting did not automatically suggest danger. And yet, hidden within those statements was a clue that would echo through the next 28 years. A clue whose importance remained largely unrecognized. The investigation remained in its earliest stage. Officers worked with incomplete information. Limited evidence. Uncertain timelines. They were still searching for a missing child. Not yet a murder victim. That distinction shaped every decision. Every expectation. Every assumption. The night passed slowly. Search efforts continued. The temperature dropped. The hours accumulated. Still no sign of Ricky. Still no answers. For many investigators, experience begins creating instincts in situations like these. A feeling. A concern. An awareness that certain cases do not follow ordinary patterns. Nobody could say for certain what had happened. Yet the absence of information itself was becoming alarming. A 6-year-old child had vanished. No confirmed sightings appeared after the morning. No contact. No indication of where he might be. The possibilities were narrowing. And most of them were grim. By the time dawn approached on November 29th, fear had become impossible to ignore. The search resumed with renewed intensity. Fresh officers joined efforts. Volunteers continued assisting. The estate awoke beneath another grey sky. But nothing felt normal anymore. The previous day had ended without resolution. Children arriving at school were met by concerned adults. Parents exchanged anxious conversations. The disappearance dominated attention. People wanted answers. Desperately. Many communities experience crimes. Few experience the disappearance of a child. There is something uniquely unsettling about a missing child case. An unresolved absence. A space where certainty should exist. People instinctively imagine themselves in the family's position. They picture their own children, their own siblings, their own loved ones. The result is collective fear, collective grief. Even before the outcome is known. That atmosphere hung over Welland Estate as the search entered its second day. Investigators focused on areas surrounding the estate. Particular attention was paid to locations children might reasonably access. The logic was straightforward. If Ricky had remained nearby, perhaps he would be found. If an accident had occurred, perhaps evidence would emerge. Every possibility still demanded consideration. The wooded area near the estate attracted attention for obvious reasons. Children explored there. Paths crossed through it. Its proximity made it relevant. Yet no one approaching the location could fully prepare for what awaited inside. At approximately midday, the search ended. Not because Ricky had been rescued. Because he had been found. A police officer searching the woodland noticed something unusual among the vegetation. A shape. A form partially concealed by the surroundings. The officer moved closer. What he discovered would remain burned into memory forever. There are moments in criminal investigations that divide careers into before and after. Moments investigators never forget. This was one of them. Lying among the trees was the body of a child. Small. Motionless. Silent. The search for a missing boy instantly transformed into a homicide investigation. The victim was identified as Ricky Neve, 6 years old. Dead less than 24 hours after he had left home for school. Even experienced officers found the scene deeply disturbing. Not simply because a child had been murdered. Because of the condition in which the body had been left. Ricky had been stripped of clothing. His body arranged deliberately. Positioned with arms and legs extended outward. The posture appeared intentional. Purposeful. As though someone had spent time creating a final image. Investigators immediately recognized the significance. This was not random. This was not panic. This was not an offender fleeing in fear. The staging suggested thought. Decision-making. Behavior extending beyond the act of killing itself. Forensic specialists soon arrived. The woodland transformed into a major crime scene. Tape cordoned off the area. Photographers documented every detail. Evidence teams began searching methodically. Every footprint mattered. Every fiber mattered. Every trace potentially held answers. The atmosphere shifted from search and rescue to something much darker. Now investigators needed to identify a killer. And they faced a disturbing reality. The offender had almost certainly been someone capable of approaching a 6-year-old child without immediately triggering alarm. Someone who had gained enough trust to bring him into the woodland. Someone who had remained at the scene long enough to stage the body afterward. Someone who appeared frighteningly comfortable operating within the local environment. Those conclusions raised uncomfortable questions. Was the offender local? Did he know the area? Did he know the victim? The answers remained uncertain. But one fact was undeniable. A child had been murdered. And the person responsible was still free. News of the discovery spread rapidly through Peterborough. Then beyond. Shock replaced uncertainty. Fear became reality. Parents who had spent the previous day hoping for good news now confronted a nightmare. A 6-year-old boy had not simply disappeared. He had been killed. The estate changed forever in that moment. Its identity became linked to the crime. Its streets became associated with tragedy. Its name entered national headlines. And somewhere, beyond the police tape and media attention, the killer watched events unfold. Carrying knowledge no one else possessed. A secret that would remain hidden for nearly 3 decades. A secret that investigators were only beginning to uncover. And as forensic teams continued working inside the woodland, the first clues of one of Britain's most infamous miscarriages of investigative focus were already beginning to emerge.